Okay, good morning, everyone. It is 9 o'clock. We will go ahead and get started. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is located on the wall over there. And there's also an external defibrillator in the back. I do want to also say that due to the state of emergency caused by COVID and as provided by Nebraska Statute 84-1411, the Governor's Emergency Declaration of COVID, the county board meeting is also available via Zoom. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will begin with the agenda for the Douglas County Board of Equalization. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Maureen Boyle. Here. Commissioner Mike Boyle.
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Here.
Commissioner Friend.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan. Commissioner Rogers. Madam Chair.
Present. Items A is approval of the minutes of Board of Equalization meeting held Tuesday, May 4th, 2021. And item B is call for a meeting and set Tuesday, May 18th, 2021 as a date for hearing on certified assessment corrections reflecting the addition of omitted property to the tax rolls or increased value on property. Is there a motion to approve A and B? Motion by Commissioner Maureen Boyle, seconded by Commissioner Chris Rogers. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, all other commissioners voting in person.
Item C, citizen comments. Is there anyone in the chamber wishing to speak to the Board of Equalization about an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to resolutions. Resolutions D and E, and please note that there was not a hard copy or a virtual copy of the resolution for item E, but it is available now and we all have it in our hands. Is there a motion to approve items D and E and adjourn? Motion by Commissioner Chris Rogers, seconded by Commissioner Maureen Boyle. Any questions or comments? Please vote. And again, that does include adjournment.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, all other commissioners voting in person.
We move to the agenda for the Douglas County Board of Corrections. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Maureen Boyle. Commissioner Mike Boyle.
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh. Commissioner Friend.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan. Commissioner Rogers. Madam Chair.
Present. Item 1, approval of the minutes of the Board of Corrections meeting held Tuesday, April 13th, 2021. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Commissioner Maureen Boyle, seconded by Commissioner Chris Rogers. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, other commissioners voting in person.
Item 2, citizen comments. Is there anyone here wishing to speak to the Board of Corrections about an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to the report from our Director of Corrections. Mike?
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mike
Morning.
Myers, Director of Corrections. You may recall last month we were talking about the demographics of our population and the risks and programs that we offer to mitigate those risks. And at that time, there was a team of researchers from the University of Nebraska at Omaha School of Criminal Justice who were presenting some data that they had evaluated from our own population here in Douglas County. So before I get into my report, and so that they can get on their way, I will invite them to come up and do their presentation, and then I'll finish with my report.
Thank you. So we're actually starting with item 4, the presentation of recidivism data by the University of Nebraska at Omaha for the Douglas County Department of Corrections. And if I could just remind the speakers to please speak directly into the microphone.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Ebony Eppinger, and I am here today with Ryan Spahn, Emily Wright, and Joseph Shorts. And today we are going to be talking about the levels and effects of risk factors and need factors among the DCDC population by race and gender. So I just want to start with a little bit of a background about the project. The University of Nebraska at Omaha team, in partnership with the DCDC Jail Administration, evaluated the Reentry Services Program. So the evaluation includes, but is not limited to, examining the prevalent risks and needs among the jail population, examining how these risks and needs relate to recidivism at 6 and 12 months post-release, and then examining how these risks and need factors differ by race and gender. And I just want to briefly explain what risk factors and need factors are. Risk factors are static and historical in nature. Okay, sorry. They are static and historical in nature, things as age at first arrest, age, prior confinements. These cannot be addressed through programming and interventions. We cannot go back and change them. But generally, risk factors are related to recidivism. So essentially, past behavior predicts future behavior. Need factors, on the other hand, are addressable through programming and interventions. They're dynamic in nature, and these are going to be things like substance abuse and mental health illnesses. And although need factors compared to risk factors are not always related to recidivism, they are important for successful reentry upon release. And so we're going to start by talking about the levels of risk factors, again, those historical static risk factors by gender and race. So in terms of the racial categories, we compared whites and blacks within the DCDC population because these were the two largest subgroups. But we do hope to explore comparisons with other racial and ethnic groups such as Hispanics in the future. So starting with the top table here, comparing whites and blacks, we are starting with the levels of risk factors. We can see that blacks had higher levels of risk factors compared to whites within the DCDC population. Blacks had they were 20 years old, so they had a lower age at first arrest. They also had a higher number of prior admits compared to whites, and they were also more likely to return to jail within 6 months and 12 months. The bottom table compares the level of risk factors by gender. So males compared to females, we see that they had higher levels of risk factors. They had a higher level of prior admits compared to females, as well as higher likelihood of returning to jail within 6 months and 12 months. But on the other hand, the females within the DCDC population had a higher level of self-reported criminality or past criminal behavior. So now we're going to turn to the descriptives or the levels of the need factors. So again, those dynamic need factors that we can address through interventions and programming. We're going to start by race, so comparing whites to blacks. So we can see here on the table that whites had a higher level of need compared to blacks within the DCDC population. So for example, with unemployment, whites were 45% unemployed, 12% homeless, I want to point out the internalizing and externalizing behavior. Those are two measures. They were scales that measured mental health, and so whites were higher among those. They were also higher with PTSD at 30%, as well as TBI, traumatic brain injury, at 43%. And those last four measures are the physical and sexual abuse. This is victimization that they experienced as either an adult and or child. So whites had higher levels of many of these need factors compared to blacks within the DC population. Now I'm going to turn to describing the levels of need factors by gender. And as we can see, comparing the females to the males within the DC population, females had a higher level of needs. At unemployment, they were 48%. Again, that externalizing behavior or that mental health illness, they had higher levels of compared to men, as well as with PTSD, and again, experiencing physical or sexual abuse or victimization as a child and or adult. So prior to the pandemic, DC did provide programming or had a mod for veterans. And so therefore, we wanted to compare veterans to non-veterans, looking at the risk factors and need factors. So we can see here on the left, individuals that identified as a veteran, they had a higher level of prior confinements compared to those that were not a veteran. They also were more likely to be homeless at roughly 16%. They also had higher levels of PTSD compared to those who were not a veteran at 31%. And veterans also had higher levels of traumatic brain injury at 48%. So they fared a little worse off as they entered into adulthood compared to those who were not a veteran. We also wanted to look at the impact of PTSD and traumatic brain injury on felony returns to jail for veterans and non-veterans. So we can see here at the bottom that veterans who had PTSD, this increased their likelihood of returning to jail for a felony by 4 times. So they were 4 times more likely to return to jail for a felony if they had PTSD. Veterans who had non-veterans who had PTSD, there was no impact on returning to jail for a felony. Veterans who had a traumatic brain injury, they actually had decreased likelihood of returning to jail for a felony by two-thirds. And then the non-veterans who had TBI, again, there was no impact on them returning to jail compared to veterans. And so now we're going to turn to the descriptives or the levels of need factors by TBI status, and I'm going to let Joseph Schwartz explain this to you via Zoom. So, Joe?
Thank you, Ebony, and thank you, everyone. Good morning. So I won't spend too much time here, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about why we decided to look at TBI specifically, and then break down these needs factors by TBI. The primary reason is that we see that TBI within this jail population is about 3 to 4 times greater than what we would expect to see within the general population. So for that reason, we decided to examine these need factors by TBI as well. And as you can see in the slide here, there is quite a bit of need factors that are significantly higher amongst this population that has experienced a TBI. So for example, those individuals who have gone to jail, who have experienced a TBI previously at some point during their life, they have a higher prevalence of homelessness, for example. They score higher on those internalizing and externalizing behavior problem scales that Ebony talked about earlier. So higher levels of general measures of mental illness. We also see a significantly higher level of PTSD, drug abuse, and various forms of abuse. And so these findings indicate that there is a very strong amount of need that's clustering within this TBI group. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ebony and Ryan to kind of finish things up. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so we talked about the levels of these risk factors and these need factors broken down by race and gender. Now I want to turn it to the effects or the relationship that these risk factors and need factors have on recidivism for gender and race. But before I get started, I just want to point out the color coding scheme that we have for this slide and the next few slides. So the dark red cells indicates that that measure had a strong correlation or relationship with either returning to jail at 6 months and or 12 months. The medium red indicates a more moderate relationship or correlation between the measure and those two outcomes. The light pink indicates a weaker correlation or relationship between those two outcomes. And then if the cell is blank, it means that there was no relationship or correlation with that measure and the outcomes. So I'm going to start by talking about the risk factors and recidivism for gender. So we can see here comparing the men to the women. Men who were experiencing these risk factors essentially were more likely to return. So there was a relationship for age at current arrest, age at first arrest, that self-reported criminal past behavior, and then having a higher number of prior jail admits. Those were stronger relationships for men, whereas with women, we didn't really see a translation between the risk factors and recidivism for them, just the age at the time that they were arrested for 12 months. Turning to the effects or the relationship between risk factors and recidivism for race, we can see that for whites and blacks, they're pretty similar within the DCDC population, while the blacks do have more of those cells that are filled in, but there are similarities. So for example, for both whites and blacks, the number of prior jail admits had a very strong relationship or correlation at both 6-month and 12-month returns. So we see more similarities between whites and blacks for the risk factors. So now turning to the need factors, again, we're going to start with gender, comparing the men to the women. And so we can see, just as with the risk factors, men had more need factors that were related to recidivism for that 6-month return and that 12-month return compared to women. Not only did they have more relationships, but these relationships were more medium to strong compared to women, where most of those cells are blank, except for one, which is not having an income, was more weakly related to returning at 6 months for women. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the effects of the need factors for recidivism for race. So again, comparing whites to blacks, we can see similarities when we were looking at risk factors. A lot of those cells are filled in. However, blacks had stronger relationships, so with these need factors. So not having an income, having less than a high school diploma, again, that externalizing behavior that generally measures mental health illnesses, drug abuse, some of those were stronger relationships. These need factors had stronger relationships for recidivism for blacks. So similar in terms of seeing the cells filled in, but blacks had more stronger relationships between those need factors and recidivism. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of wrap it up and conclude, and I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Spahn.
Okay, thank you, Ebony. My name is Ryan Spahn. I'm, for the record, Director of the Nebraska Center for Justice Research at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And we've thrown a lot of numbers at you. I just want to kind of sum it up a little bit. So takeaways from this, what are the important points? Overall, we uncovered a white marginalized group within the jail population, regardless of gender. So that was a bit of a surprise for us. However, we also found, as we went through the presentation, experiencing the highest levels of problems does not necessarily increase one's risk of recidivism measured as returns to jail. So important findings, so just highlighting the things that we found to be important to us. Things like homelessness, and none of these probably are a surprise, but things like homelessness, PTSD, physical abuse, having been abused in the past, and a record of past criminal behavior were all relevant need factors for these individuals. We looked at the veterans population again. This data is pre-COVID. We had special programming that was available to veterans, and so we wanted to look at those separately. Veterans had higher levels of homelessness, PTSD, traumatic brain injury compared to non-veterans, and PTSD in particular was the thing that stood out as being strongly correlated to new jail stays for felony offenses for veterans. Looking at TBI, Dr. Swartz mentioned the importance of TBI in this data set and why we looked at that. Those with higher TBI had higher levels of many needs, and those who sustained a TBI had more jail admissions over the subsequent 12 months. And as we showed in the presentation, TBI seemed to be related to a lot of these other factors, these other life circumstances that tended to result in returns to jail. And then finally, why does this matter? What should DC, the Department of Corrections, what should they do with this information in the future? So looking at risks and needs, first of all, risks, we argue, and again, those are the historical factors, the unchangeable factors. They should be assessed to obviously guide security protocols within the facility. They should be used to determine individuals who can be most impacted by programming. Science tells us that investing your dollars in the high risk and the medium risk individuals has more return on investment and is more impactful than investing those resources in the lower risk individuals. So risk is important to measure for that reason. And then finally, it helps to determine which individuals are most likely to return to jail. That's kind of the point of measuring risk, is looking at risk to recidivate or return. Moving to needs, so those factors that are changeable and can be addressed by programming, they should be addressed to target the appropriate programming for specific individuals and their most salient needs. Particularly, as I said, for the higher risk persons, you get more return on investment. And finally, needs that are correlated with recidivism should be prioritized for treatment. That's why we looked at the correlations between the needs and recidivism, what leads to returns to jail. And kind of interestingly, what we found is some high needs persons did not return to jail. We found this particularly with the women in the sample, but they may still benefit from programming because there are other considerations that we haven't measured. So our only outcome that we looked at here was recidivism in the form of returns to jail. But there's relationships, there's parenting. A lot of women in our jail and in our prison systems are parents. There's cognitive thinking. So addressing these other considerations, things that we weren't able to measure in this data, can improve their lives in ways that can promote public safety and promote a healthy community. So that's what we have for you today. We'd be open to try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thanks for this. Do you have this in hard copy for us? This is a lot of information to absorb just on the screen there. Could we get it in?
We can distribute the presentation.
You supply that to the clerk, maybe?
Yeah.
That'd be great. You reference a white marginalized group. Could you define that for us, please?
That is defined empirically based on the findings of our data. So the slide comparing the need factors for males and females, and we saw all of the darker shaded colors on the side for the females as compared to males, and that's just simply differences in things. The ones that really jumped out for me, obviously things like TBI and PTSD were important, but if you looked at those abuse variables, so we had 4 that was suffering from abuse as a child, physical abuse as a child, physical abuse as adult, sexual abuse as a child, sexual abuse as adult. Females were at rates 5-6 times larger than males, and a number of the other needs that we looked at. So by saying that phrase, we're just simply summing up what the data told us about the needs factors, the levels of the needs factors that the females were reporting compared to the males in the sample.
So if I understand you, the white marginalized group are white females?
Mostly females.
And that phrase, marginalized, what is that?
That just simply a summary of what we found in the data. So we could use an alternative phrase might be a high need group. And in our case, a surprisingly high need group. It wasn't a finding that we necessarily expected to find. It just seems in those need factors that we measured in this project, they had surprisingly high levels of needs compared to other groups.
You've probably become familiar with the population of our correction center over the course of this study, which is overwhelmingly majority minority, people of color, right? Which then I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, results in a majority of the recidivism among that population, just in gross numbers. Is that correct?
Compared to their representation in the population, we would probably see a higher rate of recidivism, yes.
You'll hear shortly the director go through this report, which shows that 46% of the population of our correction center today is black, and 13% is Hispanic, and 2.6% is Indian, 1.4% is Asian, 6.67% is other. Only 35% is white. So this factor, race, how does that play into recidivism?
Anecdotally, because that wasn't the focus of the study, we only got access to them once they were already in jail. But I think it impacts almost every step that you see in the what we might call the funnel of the criminal justice system that would lead to a stay in jail. We've done research in other ways looking at what we're seeing in racial disparities in our prison system and other points in probation, on parole. It's fairly consistent. I'm a sociologist. If you ask me, we're going back. We're looking at things like education levels. We're looking at things like employment opportunities. We're looking at things like historical structural barriers to minorities in accessing, the things that help us to stay out of jail. So that would be my suggestions.
Okay. And I'll probably come back because we're going to run out of time here shortly. But I noticed in the economic scale that you did relative to how that plays into recidivism, there was no top end on that. Both educationally and economically, was it just a statistically insignificant portion of the incarcerated population?
Right. That's part of it. We do have that data. We actually created a low cut point because we can look at this in a number of different ways. And as we said, there's a lot of analysis we want to do yet. But that like high school education versus no high school education, that really separates the population. Same thing with income.
Thank you.
I'll come back.
Commissioner Maureen Boyle. You should be on now.
Okay, there we go. So first, thanks for that. I find this information fascinating. And just to piggyback a little bit on what Commissioner Kavanaugh was talking about, in your data, it appeared that white versus black people have risk factors that can actually be treated and addressed is what comes across to me. So in a way, it almost sounds like we're not making the problem any better that we have a hugely disproportionate number of people of color in the correction center. So the question I have is, and I don't know if this is your area or not, but can you think of, or can you figure out ways or programs that can actually help the minority population in the jail system right now to prevent recidivism? Do you have any theories on that?
All right, I'll start, and then I'll let Dr. Wright jump in as well. We have her on Zoom today, and she was one of the lead investigators on this. But I would just say, finding out who the highest risk individuals are, so that's measuring the risk level, because that's where we can make the most difference. And in a jail population, one of the targets of this particular research project was those individuals that are coming back over and over. Let's try to see if we can do something, to help them for their sake, for public safety's sake, for tax dollars' sake, but then find out what specifically, so measure those needs. What are the specific needs that those individuals are seeing? So if we're talking about trying to get at racial disparities, make sure that you're using data collection techniques that can generalize to all of our racial and cultural subcategories, identifying what those needs are, and then matching them to programming. And when this project started, that was a major goal, is let's see how we can identify what risks and needs are and match that to appropriate programming. In a jail setting, because of a short length of stay, a lot of that programming has to happen in the community. It's no longer in the realm of what the jail can do, so there has to be that warm handoff to community providers, so that was a major goal. As we all know, there was a pandemic that changed the lives and the work of what was going on. That happened right in the middle of our research project, so we're actually a little bit, I would say, kind of behind on that of trying to make that happen. I'll turn that over to Dr. Wright. Do you have any additional comments that you'd like to say?
Yes, thank you so much. I do think that a lot of it boils down to services and programming. Many of the things that you can do for minority populations, you can also do for majority populations as well, and they will probably be beneficial. Some of the things that we found in this study are very basic needs that are linked to public safety, personal safety, and then just things like employability, getting a job and things like that. So like being able to have a driver's license upon release, or having the services available to know how to get a driver's license upon release. Some of the very, very basic things need to be addressed, and probably could be addressed with some innovative thinking. So the other thing is, I think programmatically speaking, from an administrative standpoint, it's important to understand that our minority populations absolutely do have generally longer criminal histories, and they score higher on your risk variables. And that's from a lot of reasons,
1 minute.
like Dr. Spahn talked about, a lot of structural inequality, historical stuff, and things like that. But that's why it's important to look at the things that you can change, the dynamic things that you can change through programming, because you'll never be able to change when a person was first arrested. That's a historical factor. They can't change that. The number of times they've been in jail. Again, you can only reduce the number of next times that you come back in, but you can't change the historical nature of that. And so to identify and focus on the things that you can change will be more beneficial, I think, in the long run for administrative considerations.
Yeah, it just seemed to me we have programs that will help this targeted population of white people, but it'd be nice if, as you said, to do something for people of color as well.
Time. Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Mike Bren.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Ryan, thank you, and thanks to your team, to everybody for this. The measures are very thorough. When I was going through them, I couldn't help but think, is there a measurement point to individuals being raised or potentially affected by broken homes? So in other words, maybe it's not being tracked through recidivism, right? I mean, there might be other studies and sociological tests that are factoring that. So in short, are we factoring that metric, for example, a youth growing up without one or both parents or a strong guardianship that's ostensibly responsible for emotional and psychological growth? So I'm just wondering if that's a necessary metric within those measurements right now that wasn't pointed out in the slides.
Right, and I could be wrong, and I'll let Dr. Wright correct me, but I don't think we had that measure in this data set. Because we're looking at an adult population, we did get some of those recall variables from childhood, such as experiencing sexual abuse or physical abuse. I don't think we had broken home in a youthful population. So if we're looking at juvenile probation, or we're looking at the Juvenile Assessment Center diversion, the instruments that they use do have a lot more measures that focus on the stability of the home, and that can be what the research tells us. If you have one solid connection between a parental authority figure, a parent, biological parent, an adopted parent, and a child, that's the most important thing. A second one can help, but it's really that 0 to 1, having no strong relationships with a parental figure to having one is very important. So that's what we know from the literature. And if we had been looking at juveniles, we'd probably have a lot more measures of that. For this adult population, we did not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Friend. Commissioner Maureen Boyle?
Just another comment too. I was amazed actually the information on traumatic brain injury. And what you're doing there is showing how something organic, something that affects an organ actually can influence mental health and behavior in a huge way. So I think that just goes back this is more of a comment than anything, it goes back to how we're on the board here, we're creating this initiative to address mental health in the community and tying in the same things you're talking about, like social determinants of health, how homelessness and PTSD, all these things tie into criminal, or I shouldn't say criminal behavior even, but really just people ending up in the corrections facilities. So I applaud you on your work, and anything you can do to help us kind of get to that. That's what we're trying to do, is prevent first-time encounters with the criminal justice system, but also recidivism. So, and then going back to, again, the thing I was talking about earlier, it looks like a lot of these programs are addressing white people, but and sure Black people are involved in it as well. But I was wondering if there was anything very specific in the Black community, or just not just Black, but just for people of color, as opposed to those risk factors that you stated in your study, that you think could be addressed in order to decrease some of that recidivism, something new, something unique, because the things you're stating there are things I think we're all familiar with.
Right. You know, one thing just offhand, criminal thinking. So the changing the attitudes and the thinking patterns, some programs have been shown to help. So in our correctional system, for example, at the state level, programs like Thinking for Change or moral recognition therapy are programs that try to address that from a programming standpoint. From a community and historical standpoint, and I know I've done a lot of work in the juvenile justice system as well, and I think we see the same things: transportation issues, child care issues. So if we identify needs that can be addressed and we have the programs, individuals, they have to be culturally appropriate, that's important. They have to be trauma informed. You saw the high rates of victimization and PTSD that we saw in this sample. So culturally appropriate, trauma informed, but also, do they have child care needs? Do they have transportation needs? Can they get to the program? Where are the programs located? Are they located in communities that are accessible to the majority of our minority populations? And if not, what are the sorts of things that we can do about that? Can we move the locations of programming, provide new locations where they can be offered? Can we make differences with our public transportation systems? Can we provide childcare so that individuals can get the help they need without leaving children unsupervised, things of that nature? So some things are just very basic and more logistical. Of course, they all cost money and take planning and resources and those sorts of things. So from both sides, there are some programs that I think can be effective, but we have to have the logistical possibilities to get those programs delivered.
Very good, thank you.
Commissioner Mike Boyle?
Yes, first of all, this was a very useful presentation focusing on people, which is what we need to do all the time. One of the things that I have observed is that in South Omaha and in some cases in North Omaha, the youth athletic programs are the savior of communities. In South Omaha, the PACE, which is a police officers organization operating for some time, now has 7,000 children involved in all sorts of athletics, which gets them off the street and into competitive situations. This morning, while we're discussing this, as a matter of fact, South High School is playing in a tournament at Morrison Field. And the significance of that is that many of the players are from the Sudan, and they have been coached by the Omaha Housing Authority, and they show up for practice. They live in the projects, kind of a bleak setting. They are very competitive. Many of them will end up playing professional soccer. Several of them will because of their determination. That's the sort of thing that works. OHA has been the seeds of that, and it's been followed through by other coaches. I think I really was interested in what Mike Friend said about families. It's one that is a touchy situation, but it's the real question. And I think we can't make a family where one doesn't exist, but we can take steps through athletics and so forth, I think, to try to build that confidence and to change the way people live because they begin to cooperate. And that South High team is really a great example. So anyway, I really think I appreciate the presentation. I'd like to see us talk about solutions. I've always been concerned about lead being a problem on the north side. Once that gets into a child's blood, it's the end of it. There's really no way to get that taken care of or to get it cured. So I'm very concerned about that continues. Also, poverty, of course, I think is a big item. We need to find ways to get the driver's license. That's an excellent point. Get the GED program back on track. It was derailed by some kind of a system that made it more difficult to get a GED. All those things are practical ways. And I'll close my comments by saying that a year ago, a young man was put out of school because of truancy, and he was told to go to one of the other alternative schools. Not only did he not know where it was, but he had no transportation to it. The system just simply collapsed on him. It didn't work, and that's just one of those things that happens, but it was fatal. He was later shot and killed. It is really a traumatic experience. We need good housing, we need good treatment, we need good employment. Again, poverty in my eyes is the basic problem at hand for everybody who's in this web. But I do think that there are some alternatives like youth athletics and some of those things that can really turn people's lives around. Finally, I'll say that I've noticed, maybe you have too, that occasionally in the last couple of months or 3 months or so, many of the shootings that take place are by young people with clearly names from their home country. They're not Smith and Jones using guns. They're kids with names that I can't even recall now. It says to me that we have a community disintegrating right in front of us. And so we need to figure out how to interrupt that because those young people are ending up in our system as well. But I want to thank you for this presentation. It was very useful and will help us develop further programs. We have a very progressive leader of corrections, and we have, I believe, a county board that believes in serving people first. And so we're right on track and in sync with what you've done. And thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Kavanaugh, can you push your button on for a request so I can turn your mic on? There you go. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Going back to what we were talking about in terms of the major markers here, it appears that race and wealth are the main common denominators of recidivism. Is that right?
They are related to returns to jail. I wouldn't say that wealth in the form of, say, poverty, the flip side. Poverty is probably an underlying factor for a lot of what we're seeing here. If we look at any jail population, if we look at any prison population, generally these are not, our middle class individuals. And so the needs, a lot of the risks that we're looking at are undoubtedly correlated with poverty and race as well, just because of the things that we've talked about, the structural factors, the history, the potential barriers, where our jobs are, where our educational opportunities are.
So going back to, our census population, both in the correction center and in the youth center, overwhelmingly, 70, 80% people of color. Did I understand correctly that your study did not look into the juvenile setting relative to first arrests and detentions?
We did not look at the juvenile facility.
Wouldn't that count towards recidivism? If I'm picked up when I'm 16, 17 years old and then subsequently arrested, when I'm 18, 19 years old, that would be the first arrest and detention, wouldn't it?
It would, it would count in our measures that would impact the age at first arrest, that measure that we have, and
Right.
that is a very strong risk factor, one of those things that can't be changed. You can't ever change that age of first arrest. It is universally a very strong predictor of future behavior. And then those juvenile arrests would add to the number of previous arrests. So we'd be capturing those historical factors, or they wouldn't be captured as recidivism, they'd be captured as those risk factors, number of arrests and age at first arrest within our data.
So this study that you're conducting, is this an ongoing initiative?
Yes, we're in the first year of a second 3-year phase, so we have another couple of years that we're going to be working on this under this current
So
phase.
going forward, will you have the opportunity to include information on the juvenile apprehensions and detentions to inform this recidivism calculation?
For anything new that we do, we would consider, would continue to have that information on the first time that they're arrested, the number of arrests that they have. I don't know that there will be any institutional data of what may have happened in a juvenile facility that would make it into our analysis, but that's certainly something that we could talk about.
Yeah, we've asked about that in the past, and there is a little bit of a disconnect between the youth center and the correction center. They're different departments, and they do different things with different populations. But obviously, there's a connection there that would be, I think, valuable in any calculation of recidivism. If I'm discounting anybody before the age of majority from contact with the police, well, I'm just ignoring an enormous population. That could be statistically significant in the recidivism question going forward.
Right, and one way to get at that, and as a person that my job is to work with data, there's a lot of data sets that don't speak with each other at the county level, at the state level. We also look at crossover youth and youth that have been in both the child welfare and the juvenile justice system. There's a lot of disconnect in
1 minute.
those data sets. So getting data across these different institutions is very difficult. But we can ask historical questions of the individuals. For example, this data collection happened around the time of intake, within the first 72 hours or so we can ask more of those historical factors. Now, again, you're depending upon the honesty of the individual, as you are with
That'd be
most of these
edifying.
things.
As you heard from some of my colleagues, Commissioner Friend and Commissioner Boyle, we're interested in antecedents, what came before, what leads to this, but we're also interested in the possible solutions, things that we can do going forward. And much of this impacts on that younger population. I mean, you get people, when they're young, it's easier to affect positive change than later on. So going forward, if you have the opportunity to include some of those suggestions in your findings, that would be very valuable. Thank you.
Commissioner Rogers?
Hey, Ryan, let me ask you, okay, I want to kind of context this back to where you are. I just want to make sure that when I saw your data, there wasn't a significant numbers difference between the arrest of blacks and whites, was there? I mean, I'm wondering, I see that when you put one of those up, I didn't see it because I just want to make sure before I get into the next line of questions, it didn't look like that number was.
There's a difference in the number of prior admits. So the black individuals in our sample had an average of 11 prior admits, and that's just our measure is prior admits to the jail, and for whites that is 6. So
To
a difference
jail,
of
though.
11 to 6.
Okay, so, and when you say that's your recording there in our facility?
Yes.
Okay, so it's adults.
Yes.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to ask is in the context of what you say you're doing this over 3 years, so if this is now, your 3-year block was, I don't know, 2019 and 18 or 17, 18 and 19. Okay. I guess what I want to ask you is, based on what you all said, because and looking at this, from what you hear and even from the numbers in there, that when you pointed out the marginalized white population, you did not see in that number to me the traditional black-white inequity in certain deals.
Right.
And keeping in context of this, what you're doing, is that to me that is saying the real issue in that is either income or access to health care. Because basically, Medicaid expansion hadn't happened yet. I'm interested to see what happens in 3 years when you have Medicaid expansion. I just want to make sure in context of what we're saying there, because if we're talking about getting at a solution, it's all this other healthcare stuff of not having mental health access out there, or person getting out there and not having a medical home, and that's what I saw in that, not taking away any of the other stuff, but just saying in the box of what you all are presenting, what I saw was healthcare. Is that safe? Because I didn't see, I mean, the color stuff is definitely, the race things are there, but in our population, it's basically saying when people get out, they don't have a medical home, they don't have nowhere to go, they don't have anywhere to stay, and they need health care so they don't come back. Is that fair?
Yeah, we cannot say that specifically from our data. We don't have measures of, do you have a medical home, those sorts of things. But I think generally the literature would be consistent with that. And if you're talking, more specifically in mental health care, absolutely. If you identify that there are things that need to be addressed, but then we don't do anything about them, or we simply don't have the opportunities. We don't have the providers. We don't have the transportation access to the providers or the childcare access to get to the providers. Then that would all be consistent, I believe, with what we found here.
So is it fair to say that a ground one may be, particularly, I thought I saw in the data, the males, was it the males or the females that had the health care, that had the greater issue risk-wise? The white female was more marginalized.
Right. So if we looked at the those internalizing behaviors, so those are kind of the mental health issues that somebody turns internally versus, and then the external ones, those are the ones, kind of acting out sorts of things.
1 minute.
Those are higher for females than for males, and they were higher for whites than for blacks in the way that we measured them with our scales, with standardized psychological scales.
Yeah, I guess my only thought in the closing piece is, I'm just wondering if I saw through there is that we need to be trying to facilitate some type of connection between a medical home, like with a FQHC or something like that, that deals in that population to try to make sure that they get something set up there when they leave. So, I'd be interested to see what your other 3-year stint says when Medicaid expansion kicks in and there's an option, but I still think there will be an issue if you don't connect them somewhere where they can get enrolled, because they could have and still not be able to use it. So, thanks.
Commissioner Mike Boyle?
Sorry. I think Commissioner Rogers really nailed it. I think healthcare is really a big component of care for these folks. They have never had a medical home. They probably never had a medical examination. They haven't been tested for lead. They haven't been tested for a lot of things. And I think that it's a real critical need. And I think we need to take that into consideration and do everything we possibly can. I think too that I received an email from Cox Communications a couple of days ago talking about how they're going to extend internet service at a special rate for their customers. And I wrote back and I said, what about people that are not Cox customers? How do you serve them? Do you think you have an obligation to do that? And they wrote a nice thing back, which kind of said no. In any event, I don't know what effect, because I'm not computer literate. So I wonder what kind of effect it would be to have these homes where people are living that have never had internet service suddenly have it. I mean, there's telemedicine and other things that are available. I don't know whether that's really a leap that doesn't make any sense or not. I'd like to hear what people think about providing internet service to people who are living in poverty. Is that really insanity, or does that make sense?
Okay. Did you expect a response, or do you want us to just take a look at that in the future, Commissioner Boyle?
Both. Both. I don't know whether Dr. Wright would comment or anyone else would do that. I would appreciate it. But I just am curious whether that makes any sense at all, or is that a factor in any of this, or is that just ridiculous?
If I may take a second to try to respond to that, I think if you think of internet service as being a basic necessity in that it facilitates a lot of, I'm sorry, my son is on internet right now for school. So that is a basic necessity in our lives right now, right? But if you think of it as being a basic necessity, just like you would expect basic medical care, access to some services. I mean, if you are suffering from PTSD to a level that you can't negotiate everyday life, I think those are absolutely basic necessities, right? And if internet allows you to get a GED or access your work environment or your educational environment, or like you said, medical stuff, that makes a lot of sense to me if you think of it as a basic necessity to facilitate success in life.
I appreciate that, and I think that we people who are living in poverty are not necessarily stupid. They are very capable. They have a lot of ability that's hidden and hasn't been discovered, and perhaps internet service could open it up. I think about looking for a job, all sorts of things. GED, as you mentioned, at home. It opens a lot of horizons, and I think we ought to explore that and put these companies, Cox and others, with their profits. Let's put their feet to the floor and say, "Come on, step up. It's time that you commit to this. It's an important part for our community, as is Wi-Fi for our city as well. It's one of the things that's being talked about in the campaign." But I appreciate your response, and I think it's correct, and I'm glad your son is at school. I'm getting a blast from UNMC on my medical health. So anyway, things happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Rogers, did you have your hand up again? Okay. If I may, I just have one question. How does this, or does it relate, did you mesh any of the information that we had gathered from our social workers with traumatic brain injury surveys a few years ago? I think there was like 6,000 interviews that were done. Did you mesh because the traumatic brain injury issue came up so heavy on your study? Was there a mesh of that information?
Yes, and I'll let Dr. Swartz has really dug into the TBI stuff a lot, so I'll let him kind of respond to generalizing a little bit about what he's already said about the TBI things.
Yeah, and I think that was a really, a strong asset of this study is that you're exactly right. We really dug in deep and had a really strong measurement of TBI. And I think that what we found, even in these very basic statistics that we reported today, is that TBI seems to be a sort of a global marker or a larger marker for a whole bunch of other smaller problems that it sort of correlates with, or what we would say, sort of coalesces with. And so we tend to see that, TBI is a indicator of recidivism. We know that folks that do recidivate are more likely to have experienced a TBI. But it's not because of necessarily the TBI itself. It's because of the implications of the TBI, sort of the complications that a TBI can cause, in addition to all of those other need factors that are not being adequately addressed that seem to really co-occur with TBI. So it's kind of this perfect storm of a situation. And maybe one of the ways, and this is something that we're exploring moving forward, but one of the ways that we can ameliorate or address some of those issues or complications that come along with TBI is to address some of those other needs, which I think some of the commissioners have hit the nail exactly on the head. We need better healthcare access, coverage, accessibility, as well as some of those other more specific issues that are unique to TBI, like memory loss, for example, some other symptoms that I'm happy to talk about if you're interested.
So, yes, I understand that, but my question is, we did a study through our social workers specifically on traumatic brain injury. Was that information used in any way during your study, because we did such a comprehensive collection of data internally? Was that used or given to the professors who were studying this or doing this study?
It's the same data, actually. It's the same people. So 2016, 17, I'm losing track of a little bit of time, but that's when we did those 5,000 to 6,000 interviews.
Right.
All this data today is tracking what's happened to those same people.
Okay, that's all right.
Yep.
That's very good. All right, thank you. That's all I had. No other questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. We look forward to future presentations on the issue, and keep up the good work. Thank you. We'll go back to our Director of Corrections.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. And I will try to be brief, as we've already taken up a good portion of your day with the Board of Corrections. Turning your attention to your report, enclosure number 1, administrative services. Following the 10th month of the fiscal year, we are $1,477,927 under budget. We will have some additional spending during the final portion of the fiscal year. However, we will finish the current fiscal year under budget. There was $273,264 spent on overtime in April. This is a decrease of $37,000 from the previous month, and I'm happy to say from January on, it's a decrease of $156,000 over the course of that time. We believe this would be even lower. We are staffing some pandemic-related positions that we didn't plan for in our staffing analysis to begin with. So I think we are finally, at long last, headed in the right direction on this issue, and that is directly due to a result of our efforts to achieve and maintain staffing levels. Enclosure number 2, community corrections. As I've said many times, our programs are quite different from the norm, and some of them have been closed. Work release, reentry assistance, and the law library were suspended during the month, but individual requests for the law library are still being addressed. Some of the programming and so forth that the team from UNO had referenced has begun in a modified form over the past couple of months, and we'll continue to move forward with that. And we did have 2 individuals achieve a GED in April. We are preparing to reopen community corrections. We have a meeting. Actually, I've had that meeting changed to a couple of weeks from now, but we'll be preparing the discussion to chart the process of reopening work release and the reentry assistance program in a couple of weeks, and hope to reopen sometime during the month of June. 24/7 sobriety operations have been modified to minimize face-to-face interactions. We have seen an increase in drug test violations associated with the changes in the program. However, a process began yesterday, as a matter of fact, to start transitioning that program back to its normal operations, where we saw a much higher rate of success, particularly with the drug testing population. Over the course of the next few weeks, the approximately 400 existing participants will be transitioned from the remote-based testing to in-person testing, and all new enrollees starting yesterday will be using the in-person testing. There were 69 individuals placed on the program. 2,066 breath tests were completed using remote breath testing technology. 6 were positive for alcohol use. There were 11 no-shows, and the overall compliance rate for breath testing was 99.9%. 49 individuals were monitored for 1,174 days of SCRAM monitoring. There were no violations of any sort, and the SCRAM compliance rate was 100%. There were 543 saliva drug tests administered with 33 violations. There were 74 drug testing patches submitted for testing with 16 violations. Work release, as I mentioned before, was closed for the month. House arrest had the busiest month that I can recall, with 142 individuals being admitted to house arrest. So we can really see the impact of the courts starting to open up and process some of these cases. The reentry assistance program was closed for the month. The therapeutic communities, like I said, we've started to reopen those in a modified form. And 2 individuals did achieve a GED. I do, just to reference real quickly back to the presentation that we just heard, the importance of dealing with people as young as possible. And in the jail, that's 18. And one of the things that we were getting close to launching before the pandemic hit was a specialized housing unit with programming just for young or youthful offenders that could serve as a feeder program, if you will, to young adult court. That will be back on our radar as a priority now that we're starting to reestablish some of our programs and some of our normal operations. Pretrial services, we continue to provide regular information to the courts for bond reductions and early pleas in response to the pandemic. There were 14 individuals who were referred for priority prosecution, which saved 94 bed days. There were 286 individuals placed on pretrial release. There were 1,310 individuals managed on pretrial release over the course of the month with a 90% compliance rate. As I said, the law library was closed, but individual requests were addressed with some of the latest information from the CDC regarding the relatively low risk of spread of COVID due to surface contamination. That has led me to believe that we can start having some serious discussions about reopening the law library with less worry about whether somebody touching the same keyboard that somebody else had recently touched would create an issue for spread. Our new pretrial case management software system is being implemented, and it'll play a key role. And I missed one bullet. We continue to participate in a pilot project to basically take a top-to-bottom look at pretrial release services and supervision for an array of things that we hope to launch later in this calendar year, with the goal of decreasing the reliance on pretrial detention and providing more opportunities for individuals to continue to carry on with the productive aspects of their lives when they're charged but not yet convicted with a crime. Turning your attention to closure number 3, compliance. We are pleased to report after months of delays due to the pandemic, we finally participated in our accreditation hearing by the American Correctional Association. We were audited last October by them, and it took 6 months to get the hearing held. But that was finally held on April 20th, and both the jail and community corrections will continue to be and are fully accredited into the year 2024. Preparations for our National Correctional Health Care Commission audit are underway, and the audit of our medical services will be completed in mid-July. The Congressional Office of Detention and Oversight, little typo there, did conduct a virtual audit of our facility as it pertains to our ICE detainees on April 12th through the 16th. And we are providing follow-up documentation from that audit as it's been requested. Enclosure number 4, personnel. A long list of staff that are included in the enclosure of this report were recognized during Corrections Professionals Week. We are immensely proud of all of our staff who have met numerous challenges over the past year. 6 officers below the rank of sergeant left employment in April, which is a little bit higher than we'd had the previous couple of months. We did have some other law enforcement agencies begin their academies, and that has resulted in a portion of those. And sadly, as I spoke to you about a couple of weeks ago, we also lost correctional officer Tanya Burnside, and so we had a net loss of 7 officers for the month. A class of 9 officers graduated from the training academy on April 29th, and we will begin our next training academy on June 1st with approximately 20 new officers. Enclosure number 5, our population. There were 1,380 people admitted to the jail during April. That is a small decrease. We released 1,387. The high count was 1,169, and the low count was 1,110, and the average daily population was 1,138. That's a decrease of 45 from the previous month, and again, I want to thank the courts for their efficiency in dealing with cases both virtually and in person. That's critical for us to have that breathing room to create space for our COVID protocols. And we also have one of our large housing units closed for renovations for the showers right now. We had the public safety bond project came in under budget, so we were able to address a couple of other projects. And we're going to be renovating, repairing and renovating the showers for 3 of the large housing units, one at a time, over the course of the summer. And so the efficiencies and considerations from the courts are greatly appreciated during that time. There were 138 custodial sanctioned bed days. That is an increase, but in the grand scheme of things, prior to the pandemic, we were running 500 bed days per month for that. So probation's done a good job of managing people in alternative ways. The U.S. Marshal population increased slightly. The ICE population remained stable. The felony pretrial population decreased. The misdemeanor pretrial population increased. Probation violations remained stable, and the female population decreased. We continue to only operate 3 female housing units. Enclosure number 6, medical. There were 1,182 intake screenings, and there were 301 health and physical assessments completed. Inmates were sent out 21 times for emergent medical care. 10 of those were by 911. There were 6 hospital admissions, which resulted in 40 days of hospitalization combined. Enclosure number 7, mental health. There were 77 psychiatric assessments. There was 102 initial mental health assessments. There were 66 mental health infirmary placements. We had 1 referral to the Board of Mental Health and 1 transfer to the long-term psychiatric facility. Other noteworthy items. We continue to address the COVID-19 pandemic. We are fortunate to report that the cases among our staff and the incarcerated population remained very low in April. However, we did lose an officer to COVID, as I've mentioned repeatedly, and Tanya Burnside's legacy will have an impact on all of us for many years to come. We have vaccinated approximately 330, or roughly 70% of our staff. As of April 30th, we had vaccinated 600 incarcerated individuals. We paused vaccinations for approximately 3 weeks due to the suspension of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We have, however, recently resumed vaccinations, and I'll continue to update those numbers for you each month. But I also want to point out that's always a rolling target because some of those people have been released. So that doesn't mean that's how many people we haven't vaccinated in the jail today. We'll continue to follow the CDC and Health Department advice and guidance during the pandemic regarding quarantine, testing, PPE use, and sanitation. There were 335 virtual court hearings facilitated and 43.5 hours of virtual review of discovery materials. We are looking to restart some of our face-to-face attorney contact. There's a big ripple effect when we do some of these things that we've changed during the pandemic. So we do have a plan to, within the next couple of weeks, to have some of the attorney visits, if they can remain virtual, we're going to ask that they remain virtual, but the ones that are important for them to do face-to-face, if they wish to do that, we'll be able to accommodate that. One of the lessons I just want to talk briefly about that I don't break these numbers out, but I get data on how many court hearings are conducted for other counties. And you see here I noted that we even did a court hearing for somebody in New York State last month. And that actually is something I would like to see us build in and make it systemic. That has there's a lot of people who have charges in Douglas County, and they might have charges in Sarpy County, or charges in Pottawatomie County. And the old way, they'd have to sit until they were all the way done with one or the other, facility was done with them, and then wait for a transfer to take them to the other facility where then courts would be scheduled. Now we're getting a lot of those things done simultaneously. And that's not a huge number yet in terms of that 335. It's probably around 20 or so of those hearings were done for other counties. But that's a real, not only does that save bed days for all of the jails in the local area, but it helps people deal with their issues, deal with their cases more efficiently, and gets them hopefully back to real life and being productive, instead of bouncing from jail to jail to jail for a very similar issue. We have tentatively selected a vendor for our body-worn camera project. We'll be meeting with .com in the coming days to finalize that decision. Our testing of our Wi-Fi access points for our inmate tablet system has been completed, and work to begin placement of the infrastructure throughout the DCDC campus will commence in the coming weeks. Work also continues to progress on placing the infrastructure for our new security system. We will be, as I mentioned earlier, opening limited reopening to in-person attorney visits in the near future. A full reopening of the lobby to the public will follow at a later time. The Department of Corrections Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee that was established a few months ago has drafted policy language, mission, and vision statements, which will be finalized at their next meeting. This committee's work is just beginning and is intended to be a permanent body within the Department of Corrections. And with that, I am ready for your questions.
Commissioner Cavanaugh?
Thank you. You know what I'm going to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the population on page 38, 46.4% Black, 13.2% Hispanic, 2.6% Indian, 1.4% Asian, 63.8% minority majority. That hasn't really changed.
It has not.
Okay. I don't think, you finished with your diversity initiative. The diversity that we're talking about here is an enormous problem. Your diversity initiative is relative to staffing diversity.
That's correct. Yep.
What are the percentages there, if you could tell us?
I don't have that data handy with me, but I can get it for you and send it to you. What I can tell you is we have been underrepresented as the further you get up the chain of command. Diversity has been underrepresented. I'm proud of the fact that minorities candidates have proven to be what the department has needed in those positions in the last couple of years. And we've promoted numerous sergeants and a few other supervisory positions to individuals of color. That's filtering further up the chain of command is a process that will take some time, but we have some long-term big picture goals to accomplish.
Right. On page 33, the average daily population, 1,138, seems to be pretty stable?
Our population has been pretty stable for the last 6 to 8 weeks. It's been kind of between 1120 and 1150 generally. Sometimes on the weekends, it'll spike up a little bit.
Right. So with the public safety bond build-outs now complete, is that correct?
Yes, all the original projects that were funded by that have been completed. There was money left over, I'm happy to say. And so we are able, the newest portions of the jail, which were built in 2004, all of those showers, are in need of repair. And we have enough funds with the public safety bond monies to do 3 of those projects. They take about 5 weeks, so we have to close the housing unit down. It's a 64-bed unit. So that'll be closed for 5 weeks. We get done with one, we'll start the other, and basically we'll work until that money has been expended.
That's really good news. And I want to commend you and Public Property for bringing that in on time and under budget, so there's additional resources available to do the things you're talking about. Good work. On page 8, the staff authorized at 479, actual 455, about 95%. I notice in the graph there that we had bumped up to almost 100% just recently, and then there was some attrition.
Right.
But
we're getting close.
we're getting close.
I mean,
there's a new class coming on.
There's a new class that should put us there. We have lost a few more staff in May. Again, it's it's a variety of reasons. A couple people are moving back to their home states. A couple people have gotten jobs with other law enforcement agencies. So it's never going to end.
Right, right. But that does save us on overtime, particularly
Absolutely.
forced overtime, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Good. Finally, the
1
COVID
minute.
cases that you mentioned, relative to the vaccinated population, I think you indicated there were 600 vaccinated inmates. That would be out of the 1,100 population, or about 50%.
I mean, it's a little risky to say that because some of the, our population changes every day.
Right.
Some of those people, 600, have left. New people have taken their place. But yes, that would be,
And that's ongoing with the census
Ongoing.
population?
Yep, we're doing vaccinations every day.
Okay. Relative to the staff, what percentage, I missed it when you mentioned?
We're up to about 70%, and we continue to encourage that among, there's a certain subgroup of people that are just have apprehensions or just opposition altogether. So
Is there anything that we could do proactively to impact that final 30%? I know it's difficult, but is there anything you can think of?
Time.
I'll come back to this.
Commissioner Friend.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Mike.
Good morning.
No, that sounded a little unprofessional. Sorry. Director Myers, sorry about that. If I might have missed this, I was looking at the COVID numbers here. If a detainee or if someone is entering the system, or more practically the facility, how difficult is it to find out if someone's presented into the facility? How difficult is it to find out whether they've been vaccinated?
So
Did I miss that?
No, I didn't talk to that, and I don't think but I can answer that. We've developed those processes because we knew shortly after vaccines became widely available, people would start to get arrested who had already been vaccinated. And we have had that happen on a few occasions. So there's 2 ways we can find out. One, they may have their COVID vaccine card with them when they're arrested, so that's easy enough to identify. Secondly, we have access, because we are now a vaccine provider, we have access, and I'm not going to recall the name of the database that all this is kept in, but we have access to the state database in order to check it and verify it. So if they don't have the documentation on them, we can look it up. The advantage to that is...
So it truly is 1984 now. No, I'm just kidding.
The advantage, there is a real advantage to them being back, because there's a whole lot of restrictions that they don't have to be subjected to if they're vaccinated.
No, point 2, that's exactly what I was looking for, and I was being trite. Sorry about that. Anyway, thanks for the info, Mike.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Mike Boyle?
Yes, excellent report. I first of all want to ask on the individuals who fail the alcohol test, what happens to them?
So if it's their first offense for an alcohol violation, they spend 12 hours with us as an immediate sanction. And as a second offense violation, it's a 24-hour stay. A third offense violation, they stay in our custody until they explain to the judge why they're continuing to drink on a program that prohibits drinking. So they usually end up being released within a matter of a few days after they've gone to court. And typically, more often than not, the judges will give them another opportunity on the program at that point.
Let me ask you, is it possible, does it make any sense to try to divert these people into Alcoholics Anonymous or some other, or whatever they're suffering from, drug or otherwise? Is it possible to do that, or do we have the authority to do it?
We don't have the authority to, put people into a diversion program. We do, however, make efforts to connect people. These are folks who are mainly out on bond. They're not in our custody. This is just a condition of supervision. Our staff in the 24/7 program go above and beyond quite often when they notice a variety of issues that may be present when they that become known to them during in individuals participating in the program. And they will try to make those referrals and provide information, whether it's to further treatment or housing issues or transportation issues. They really try to take a little more of a holistic approach with those folks beyond what we're obligated to do.
Would it be possible to suggest AA or other appropriate treatment in lieu of being jailed? I mean, we may not have the authority, but if they'll say, gee, I'll do that instead of doing the other thing. I just bring that up, and I because of the time limitations, we'll discuss it probably further, but I'd sure like to see us try to do that. Then I want to ask about, do you know the status of the mental health court? Do you know what's going on with that? Is that in place, or is it coming for us?
I don't have a recent update on that. I haven't been informed of any committee meetings or anything recently to move that forward. So it may be further along than I know.
I'll check that out. Once in a while, I get asked about ICE and immigration and our correction facility. Would you please say, for the sake of the public, what it is, what our relationship is? I know it's good, but it's still, would you please go into what we do when we're asked questions of immigration?
Yep. So we house a very small number of individuals who are detained by Immigration's Customs Enforcement. It usually runs between 10 and 15, or at least it has in recent times. That, and we've met with some of the advocates of immigrants and those who represent them legally, and they actually do think that there is a sweet spot for us in terms of the number of folks. They obviously, depending on where you stand on that issue, you have different perspectives, but there will be a certain number of people who are detained by immigration, and it's easier for them to be represented legally if they have a local facility to utilize for that detention. If we didn't do any, ICE would probably have these folks in facilities that are several hours away from here, making representing those individuals much more difficult by their attorneys.
Well, I think we're doing the right thing. My understanding, we don't permit immigration
1 minute.
to enter our facility, which I think is important, that we respect the situation of people who are undocumented. I think that's very important. Lastly, I would just want to say very quickly that I think the showers that you need to be repaired, maybe because of COVID and the money we're getting, I'm going to make a presentation to Joe Lorenz about fixing some things up. So get a wish list put together. Maybe we can get some money out of that COVID. I want to thank you for your leadership, and especially recognizing Tanya Burnside. She is was really a standout. Thank you very much for your work. It really shows. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Any other questions? Or can you turn your button on, please, so I can turn on your microphone, Commissioner Kavanaugh? Thank you.
Back to the question on the vaccine initiative. So we have this, is it 30-40% of the staff not vaccinated?
Probably about 30%.
Okay. Is there anything that can be done that you could think of, or that maybe we could discuss to impact that? I mean, those people are electing not to be vaccinated, presumably. They've had plenty of opportunities. What do you think?
You know, we've talked over months ago a variety of ideas. When I didn't, you know, when the vaccine was new and we didn't, you know, you heard a lot of people voicing their concerns or opposition, and I wasn't sure what sort of response we were going to get, you know. So I'm actually pleased that we've gotten as far as we've gotten, because I wasn't sure how that was going to go when we started. But, you know, I think that the county has done, and we as a department, we've done an enormous amount of education and encouragement. The county has made steps with how they manage the COVID admin leave and making that available for people if they have side effects after the vaccine. So there's really no financial risk to somebody. I'm going to miss 2 days of work if I get vaccinated. You know, the only thing that I can think of to go a step further would be to actually offer some incentives for people to get vaccinated. But then that I'm kind of stepping outside of my
No,
lane
this is
for
a
that.
community-wide problem, getting this last cohort of our
Right.
fellow citizens vaccinated, so we'll continue on this. When folks come in, we're talking about the census population now, are they offered a vaccination upon admission?
Yes, they are. And it's probably not going to be done the day they arrive, because we do want to check the state's database, because we want to make sure also that we're not giving a vaccine to somebody who's already been vaccinated. So
Right.
if they don't, you know, if they want it, they'll get it within the first 24 to 48 hours of their booking. At the beginning, we were doing sort of mass vaccination clinics to try and get the population who'd been there for a while, and we did 3 of those clinics, and that's where probably 5 of the 600 people who we had vaccinated by April 30th, probably 500 of those came from those 3 clinics, and then we continued to do, after the pause of Johnson & Johnson was lifted, we've continued to vaccinate people as they come in.
Do you have a handle on, of the 1,100 odd folks in the average daily population, of what your percentage of population vaccinated is, just, you know, going forward?
I could get that, because we actually did put, one of the screens we use is called a restriction screen, and we did develop a code for somebody's vaccination status, as well as the date that they received it, because as we reopen work release and the reentry assistance program, those are things that we're going to look at and say, okay, is it safe to bring this person into this more open setting? So we can, I'm sure I can get that report ran for you so that we can get a daily snapshot of where we're at.
That'd be good to know. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Nothing else for corrections? All right.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. We don't have need for an executive session. Is there a motion to adjourn? Oh, sorry, Larry, didn't see you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. It's a little hard to hear everything with the masks that are on. I'm Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette. Excuse me, 68132. I guess I want to start off with the topic of recidivism. I've done a little social work. I've done a little corrections work. I know a few people, recidivism and traumatic brain injury, and I know a few people that have either TBI due to accidents or TBI due to military accidents. And I do know some people that were born with disabilities of the brain. So I've also had experience with so-called counseling and things, lots of reading on so-called best practices. And all I want to say is, I'm not being critical, is that due to human nature, you can't fix everything with best practices. My observation over a lot of years, social workers are subject to the same human frailties as I am, so they're not necessarily always personally involved in the intent of their duties, or, well, there's another word that's similar but opposite, it slipped my mind. They don't always practice what they've been told, what they've been taught, and what they feel. Lots of factors go into that. So all I want to say is, let's don't boost up the figures on recidivism being due strictly to just traumatic brain injury. It does not excuse the behaviors. All social work wants to deal with the behaviors. They don't care about anything else. If you have a symptom, you have that behavior. It doesn't matter if it's a traumatic brain injury. So let's not spend a lot of more money trying to solve something that human nature can't solve. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Commissioner Rogers, seconded by Commissioner Morgan. Please vote.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, all other commissioners voting in person.
We'll move to the agenda for the Douglas County Board of Commissioners. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Marine Boyle? Yes. Commissioner Mike Boyle?
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh? Commissioner Friend? Here. Commissioner Morgan? Commissioner Rogers? Madam Chair.
Here. Item 1A, approval of the minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting held Tuesday, May 4th, 2021. There's also the minutes for the pre-board meeting from April 26th that are available. And item B, approval of claims submitted for payment process through Tuesday, May 11th, 2021. Is there a motion to approve A and B? Motion by Commissioner Morgan and seconded by Commissioner Rogers. Questions or comments? Please vote.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, all other commissioners voting in person.
Next is a consent agenda, items A through F. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Commissioner Rogers, seconded by Commissioner Morgan. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, all other commissioners voting in person.
Next are citizen comments. Anyone in the chamber wishing to speak to the Board of Commissioners about an item not on the agenda?
Larry Store, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, 68132. An item not on the agenda that I've attempted to get on the agenda in the past has been the rules. Rules on citizens' comments, for example. I want to start off with something that I learned in a class I take online and then we discuss on Friday mornings through Hillsdale College, explaining the founding fathers' reasons for saying and doing what they did. It has to do with common logic, sequential logic, and precise language. If all persons are equal under God, then all persons should be equal under the law and under the Constitution as well. Indeed, the Constitution defines no classes, not by race, gender, religion, or country of origin, etc. By implication, since no classes of people are defined for special treatment, either favorable or unfavorable, then all persons must be treated equally under the law and under the Constitution. Oh, so why do we need a lot of these ordinances and resolutions and things? And these people coming down the aisle like me, but often there's 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. And they get a lot of time on the microphones where average citizens don't. And number one, average citizens can't come today because they're working. Hopefully they're working. Number two, it's not worth their 3 minutes at the microphone. I want to complain also about the rules from this standpoint, talking about that logic that the founding fathers had in the precise language. The paragraph on citizens' comment rules is really not very logical if you analyze it. We're not going to take time to do that. But the agenda items themselves, for example, do not really tell me what items are under consideration. And if they do, it should also say that I'm not to comment on those at this point on the agenda. The final thing is not discoursing with the citizens that are petitioning their government. The logic of the founding fathers is you need to strike this rule on citizen comments. It was a year ago in February that we tried to do so. And a lot of citizens did come down to protest that. That quieted down since then, didn't it? But last week, right after you closed the meeting, as I was walking down the aisle, Marianne Borgeson and Mr. Boyle, commissioners both, felt it necessary to comment to me, but not with me. I find that rather unconstitutional, and I think you owe me an apology. I think you owe the citizens an apology. And I think you ought to fix part of that with an apology, but rephrasing your citizen comment rules. And don't listen to these outsiders from across this country on how you can limit citizen involvement. I see it all the time. One of the items downtown, down there in the other river city, is going to be dealing with citizens' comments at this time. Right here in River City, too. It's been talked about, but now they're taking action down there. And it is on one of your agendas for legislative action. Thank you.
Next, our presentations. We have our regularly scheduled COVID update and COVID vaccination plan update from Dr. Adipour. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Commissioners, and thanks for having me on. I'm going to kind of turn around the order this time because I want to start with the best news that we have, and that is 51.9% of our county residents above 16 years of age are fully vaccinated.
Thank you.
51.9. So we are the second health district in Nebraska. Lincoln is a little bit ahead of us with 53%, but I think this is just kudos to our community.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I would do a happy dance, but you probably wouldn't want to see that. So, or I would want to give a birthday cake to everyone because this is really great. So 60.4% of our residents have received at least one dose. Remember, President Biden is saying we need to be at 70% by July 4th. So we still have a little ways to go. I just would encourage everybody, get yourself educated, get enough information, and do it for yourself, for your friends, for your family, and for the community. So some milestones we can celebrate too. We have now administered more than 500,000 doses in Douglas County, 463,799 to Douglas County residents, and some others, of course, to those that come into our area but don't live here. When we look at it from a week ago when I talked to you, the biggest increase was in those who had one dose and then got fully vaccinated. So that percentage is 5.9%. And we saw less people who were interested in getting their first dose. That increase was only 2.3%. So 2.3% of residents were not vaccinated, didn't have a dose. They decided within last week to get vaccinated. So to me, that is kudos to all of you. I just want to share with you, we are not going to order vaccine again this week. We have about 40,000 first and second dose of Pfizer left at this time. And when we look at it and calculate it out during this week, we probably still have at the end of the week close to 32,000 doses left. Again, we can order anytime next week if it arises. You have heard the news about children who can now get the vaccine 12 years and above. 12 to 15 years and above, that means 31,631 children in our community can now get vaccinated. We are not right there yet. The ACIP needs to look at the data. They have a meeting tomorrow. I assume that is going to go very well. And then we need the order from Dr. Anton too, so that we can have that order at all of our testing sites. So potentially the earliest would be Thursday that we could start vaccinating children 12 to 15 years of age. We also know that the Boys Town and Children's Hospital are really in the planning phase, and they should be potentially ready by Monday too. Talk a little bit about the vaccination sites. We are doing quite a few drive-throughs, but also going to churches, Morning Star Baptist Church. There's another Baptist church. There's also the Cohn's Food Pantry. We are trying to go now where churches have food pantry, because many of the churches say, we already have vaccinated most of our parishioners, but if there is a food pantry there are probably individuals who are going to come to that food pantry that don't specifically belong to church. So we are going to try to go to those churches. We are going to go to the Islamic Mosque this week. And then next week, it's going to be our big push to churches. We have about a church every day. Trinity Lutheran Church, Salem Baptist, we are going to do a drive-through there. Pleasant Green Baptist Church, New Life Presbyterian churches, and now we are also looking at South Omaha churches where we could do a drive-through there. So lots of activity going on the vaccination front. On the case counts, that's really also a little bit good news for all of you. The 7-day rolling average is in Douglas County 12.7 per 100,000. Nationwide, the average is 12.5, and we want to be below 10. So we have a little ways to go, but remember, we started very high. Our transmission was high in Douglas County. And so I'm just glad to see that this rolling average is coming down. We have total cases last week, 524. That compares to the week before, 36 cases less than the week before, or a 6.2 decrease. You know, I take anything if it is a decrease. And we also saw a decrease in our testing. And of course, that means that our positivity rate is around 5.7%. Remember, we want that to be below 5. Hospitalization, we have, as of last night, we had 75 COVID patients in the Omaha area hospitals, 1/3 of them in the ICU, 25, and 12 of them on ventilators. That compares to last week, we had 94 COVID patients in hospitals. So again, I think a good sign. However, I do want to tell you the story that just really made my heart sink a little bit when a physician told me when she was on rounds and she saw a 29-year-old mom seriously ill from COVID, crying, very disturbed, had two small children at home. And she told the physician, I just wasn't able to get around to get vaccinated yet. And that should be a lesson to all of those who kind of are pushing it off and saying, you know, it just hasn't been comfortable for me to get vaccinated. Please don't put it off. You don't want to be one of these individuals in the community. There are all these sites in our community now that are walk-ins. And the health department is starting a new pilot this Friday out here on 41st Street, where our offices are, in our STD clinic. People can walk in and they can choose what vaccine they want. Do they want Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, or Moderna? It's the first time that we are doing it. We are doing it as a pilot, but I'm excited to see. I mean, there are no excuses anymore for individuals not to get vaccinated. Death, we have seen now 706 deaths in our community, and our fatality rate is still 0.99%. That's kind of what I wanted to share with you this morning. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Port. Let's see. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thank you. Thanks for this, Doctor. If I understand correctly, last week we reported 700 deaths due to COVID, and this week it's 706. So we've had 6 in the last week, basically, right?
Yes, we did. Yes.
Okay. The population of the county, short of the latest census number coming in, I think is somewhere in the 520-some thousand range, maybe a little more, per the last census information that I've been able to see. The vaccinations that you report are 463,799. Is that a correct number? Did I write that down right?
463,799.
Okay.
But Commissioner, you need to consider the denominator that we are using is 427,000 because it's only those who are eligible, 16 years and above.
I understand, and then I'm going to get to that in just a second because I think that might confuse people a little bit.
Yeah.
If you go from platform to platform relative to this information, say you were going from the CDC platform, or you're going from the New York Times platform to our platform, you're going to see disparities in these numbers. And I'm trying to clarify this for people because I think it's as simple as some people are using the gross population of a community. In the case of Douglas County, that would be 520-some thousand people. We are calculating this on the eligible population of a community. As you indicated, it's 427,000, so 100,000 less than the gross population of Douglas County, basically, right?
A little bit more than that. Our total population in Douglas County is 571,000.
Oh, it is? Oh, well, that's up considerably from the last census, but that would be 150,000 less than the gross population, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
In addition, those 463 vaccinations have people not from Douglas County in them. Is that correct?
No, in the 534,875. That's the total doses we have given in Douglas County. So potentially you could say there are about 60,000 people that are not Douglas County residents but have received one shot in Douglas County.
Okay. So the 435,000 number that you give, is what number? Because I wrote down 463,799 in terms of the total vaccinations.
In regards to total to residents, correct?
I see. Very good.
That's to residents only.
Okay. And those are eligible residents, right?
Those are eligible 16 years and above.
Right, okay. So when we're going forward, and we've talked about this before, ideally, are vaccinations going to be available for all individuals? You know, children under 16 as well as everybody else? Is that the plan?
You know, the plan is that there are studies going on, and potentially by September, it could actually be 2 to 12 years. You could see that group too. Hopefully before school starts, we may see that. I have not heard about studies that are going on from infants to 2 years of age yet.
Okay. When we're calculating getting to this 70% mark, this herd immunity mark
1 minute.
by the 4th of July, are we calculating that based on the total population or the eligible population?
Based on eligible population.
You've heard us discuss probably with the corrections people trying to get additional initiatives to the census population that they have and the staff there that they have to boost the vaccinated level. Are you working with corrections relative to that question? Because that's a sensitive population that we have there. It's not a population that can leave.
You know, we will always offer education to individuals. We have a physician on staff who could go out and do education to individuals who have issues or who are not quite sure if they want to do. So yes, we could work with Mike, definitely.
Time.
Very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Maureen Boyle.
Hello, Dr. Poor. Once again, thanks for your information, and I'm excited things are rolling the right way. So just a question, I know that this is coming up with the kids from 12 to 15 being eligible. Are we going to continue to use the same mechanisms to get them vaccinated? School's not in session, and that would be an easier way to do it. So are there other channels that we're going to do to get them vaccinated?
You know what, Dr. Boyle, what I really want to do is I think parents are more likely to trust their pediatrician. Mm-hmm. So I really would like pediatricians, Boys Town, Children's Hospital to step up and really try to do what they can, because I think, especially for those younger children, that would be much better. We'll have it in the community. There's no question about it. So if a mom feels she's pretty convinced this is the right thing to do, has no questions, she can come to our community clinics. But for those who have questions, I would encourage them to go to their trusted source, which is their pediatrician.
I see. And then any thoughts, because I know we'll get questions about when that will be rolled out. When will the vaccines be available to those physicians' offices?
So we have worked with the pediatricians to really, they have to sign up on the state site to be a COVID provider. Many of them have, and I just heard again this morning that the state is really caught up and has made sure that everybody knows how they need to put data into the system. So anybody who has shown any interest is able to do that, and we encourage them to do that.
Okay, and then for just as a physician, would it be available for me to sign up for my patients or family practice doctors who see people of all ages?
You absolutely, Dr. Boyle. You will be able to sign up for it too.
Okay, very good, very good. And then the next question has to do with just variants. Are you seeing a lot of variants coming through at this point?
You know, we are seeing many of them. I think we have less concern about the UK variant. We see about, I think we have around 320 of them. What we are most concerned about right now is the P2 variant, which is the Brazilian variant, as well as potential variant from India. And we have not seen the India variant yet.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Doctor, one last question. Relative to mask policy, I think the city has an ordinance that might have a back end on it going forward. Would it be your opinion that we should continue the mask policy that the city has in place?
You know, Commissioner, I have been asked that question, and I think I would answer it the same way. Again, I think I am okay with having it lifted. I would have liked it potentially for another month, because then we could have gone forward with vaccination or so on. But I also want to say that does not mean that everybody should still take the same precaution. That doesn't mean put your masks away. It just means that there isn't a government mandate over it, but you still should do what is best practice, which is wear a mask when you are out in public, specifically indoors with a lot of people that you do not know.
Thank you.
No other questions or comments for Dr. Poor? Thank you, Dr. Poor.
Thank you very much. Congratulations again.
Next, we'll move to our Finance Committee. The first is just our budget report as presented, unless Commissioners Morgan or Friend have anything to add. If not, we'll move to the presentation by the Douglas County Human Resources Department on its fiscal 21-22 budget request, which is $76,420 in excess of their budget target amount. And with us today is HR Director Karen Bush.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Thank you for taking time to go over the presentation today. I know your time is valuable, so I will work through the slides as quickly as I can and be available for any questions. The Douglas County Civil Service Commission was formed in 1971 by state legislature, and shortly after the commission office was created. In 2019, legislation occurred and, excuse me, the Civil Service Act was created, and the Civil Service Commission HR department moved under the county board. And the HR director reports to the county board of commissioners. And basically the purpose of the act has not changed since 1971. It's to guarantee all citizens have a fair and equal opportunity for employment. To establish the conditions of that employment, to promote economy and efficiency, and establish a personnel system of administration that meets the social, economic, and program needs of the county offices. The Civil Service Act system of personnel administration really means to look at policies and procedures, protocols related to recruitment, selection, the development and maintaining an effective and responsive workforce. Currently, the department has 12 full-time employees. The HR director reports on a daily basis to the chief administrative officer, and the HR director also serves as a clerk with the Civil Service Commission, so it's kind of a dual responsibility. We work with a wide variety of individuals. Most of the time it's with county employees, but we do have ongoing relationships with vendors, third-party administrators, consultants, .com, and federal and state government agencies, as well as the public. Our mission statement is to ensure a fair and equitable human resource system that operates in accordance with Civil Service Act, federal law, and sound management practices, ensuring a work environment that's conducive to the health and benefit of employees and the public. I think what's unique about our department is that we exist to serve all the county employees. And that covers a wide range, not only civil service employees, but we also work with elected officials. We work with non-civil service employees, which some examples are the county attorney and public defender's offices. We work with the merit commission employees, as well as temporary and seasonal employees that might be employed in any of those areas. The Civil Service Act requires that the Civil Service Commission adopt policies for hiring, advancement, training, and career development position classification, salary administration, benefits, and then discipline, discharge, and any other related personnel matters. Some of the services that we provide are benefit administration. That includes insurance, pension plans, and any IRS tax reporting that we have. The Civil Service Commission is responsible for adopting rules that apply to employment, hearing appeals, other types of statutory meetings, and then the election of civil service commissions. We have 2 employees that are elected, and we have 2 elected officials that serve on the board, and those are elected by the other elected officials. Compensation, we complete descriptions, we do job classifications, we do salaries, wage analysis, and then we're also responsible for wage and hour compliance as it relates to our department. And then we spend a lot of time with department heads, elected officials, and employees on a variety of topics that apply to them personally and their employees. And then as far as other services, employee relations, we do formal complaint investigations, and we also are involved in grievances that are related, excuse me, to civil service rules. We do employment testing, which may be before they're employed, or it could be promotional testing, as in the case of corrections. We also provide employee training and development. We develop programs that meet needs internally for departments, but then we also do work with a vendor for e-learning, and that has been utilized quite a bit since COVID started. And our training has continued, fortunately, and especially the compliance training. We do work on equal employment, not only through plans that support our grants and utilization analysis that we have to do, but we also, excuse me, conduct investigations. And then we're always, excuse me, looking for ways to promote equal employment within the county. We have government reporting responsibilities, human capital and management systems and database. We're a very heavy user of Oracle, probably one of the departments that uses it the most outside of probably the clerk's office. And labor relations, we spend time working with employees and interpreting their contracts. They have questions, same with supervisors' departments. We do seniority lists twice a year for every single union contract we have. And we do pay line recommendations, and then we also do wage scale preparation at the request of the county administrative department. We manage leave donation, and there's a host of them there that I've mentioned. Probably the area that has grown the most in HR is legal compliance. I've listed just a subset of the laws here, but there are over 20 federal laws that we have to know and be able to regulate and apply within the county, and then we have state statutes and regulations on top of that. And for talent management, we receive applications, process those. We do background screens, assessments, physical assessments, and then, of course, the drug tests. We do random drug testing. We work with the departments that have those requirements. We work with a vendor, develop a test, manage that process, and make sure that the results are received in a timely basis. We have unemployment claims and those types of things, and we participate in appeal tribunals through the unemployment. So we cover kind of a broad range of things. And this is just a quick chart to show really what we do. This is, I like to call it our metrics page. We kind of track it every year. We did 202 job postings last year. We received over 8,100 applications. We conducted 199 employment tests for applicants or existing employees. We processed and hired 454 new hires. We completed 50 job audits. We had 679 employees that completed the mandatory compliance training that they needed to. The big issue or the big increase was in FMLA, which was not a surprise. We had, with COVID, basically an increase of 2.5 times the number of applications or requests that we had to process. We had 303 in the prior year, and we did 1,050 in 2020, and 2021 isn't looking much different as far as volume. We do 88 interactive meetings, employee relations meetings, formal complaints, employment opportunity charges, and then we have employee review committee meetings where we meet with employees that they've exhausted all of their benefits and all of the leaves that they're legally entitled to, and they're not willing or able to come back to work at that time, and we hold meetings with them to see what next steps could be taken at that point, if any. We distributed 115 pensions, which actually was a decrease from the prior year of 35%. I think people probably decided not to retire because of the uncertainty with COVID and needing to have insurance. And then we processed 482 separations. One of the most interesting factors was that our formal complaints decreased by 47%, and our department has had some fun discussions trying to determine why that might be, and I think we've landed that it may be because we have more people teleworking and not in the office with each other. So as far as expenses, our budget is primarily personnel staff. We only have about $130,000 that's actually operating expenditures. So for us to look at adding staff, it's really difficult for us to reduce the small operating expenditures that we have. And so we have a budget shortfall, as the chart shows, of $76,420, and that is due to the fact that we would like to request funding for a human resource information system position. That individual will be available to help our department with the technological advances and the technology that we currently use. And I truly believe that that technology has allowed us to continue to keep our staffing levels flat for over a decade. And so, but what is happening is that the more software we use, the more demand it places on the people that are doing it as a part of their current job. And there are several individuals within our department that are exempt that are working in excess of 55 to 60 hours a week continuously. And this happened before COVID. This has been going on since probably 2018. And so it's getting to the point where obviously we have to be concerned about burnout, but we also have to be concerned about the quality of service that's being provided to all of the employees within the county. And we're not being as responsive as we have been in prior years, and it's just because our time is being dedicated to testing and implementation and those types of things associated with our various HRIS systems. So that is exactly why at this point we are requesting those additional funds.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Friend?
Hi, Karen. Hey, is there, real quick, I think we get it, but I can't get my hands around. The staff is juggling these HRIS responsibilities right now. You just had laid that out. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm throwing .com under the bus. What does that contractual relationship look like to try to alleviate some of that current HRIS growth initiative problem?
.com's role, my experience, since I've been the director since 2016, their role is to make sure that we have some limited support, but as far as if there is a roll-up patch in Oracle or there is some type of upgrade or a new module enhancement, it is our responsibility as a department to do the testing. They will help us develop scripts to follow, but the actual manpower of going through and testing the impact on every union group, on exempt versus non-exempt employees, on non-union employees, on employees that have benefits and those that don't, those types of tests are, all that lands on our shoulders and our department. So we are the ones that are doing the testing. And, you know, there isn't really a lot of support for that type of thing from .com.
Okay, Karen, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Karen? All right, thank you, Karen.
Thank you, commissioners.
Next, we have a presentation by the Douglas County Public Defender's Office on the department's fiscal 21-22 budget request, which is $190,000 in excess of their budget target. And with us this morning is the Public Defender, Tom Riley. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and other commissioners. My name is Tom Riley. I'm the Public Defender of Douglas County. And I'm here to explain why I think we need the number that I've requested in the budget. There's no doubt but that the criminal justice aspect of the county's budget is a significant portion. That would include the jail, the sheriff, county attorney's office, and the public defender's office. And what I'm here to do, I think every leader of these entities are not extravagant. We all do in our own way what we can to keep the budget where it should be. And by the way, this year we will not exceed budget in fiscal 2020-2021. One of the things that I know some of you that have been on the board before have heard some of this before, so please bear with me. There are a couple of new members that I would like to make sure I've made clear what goes on in our office. If you're charged with a crime in the United States of America and don't have enough money to hire an attorney, the Constitution requires that the government pay for defense counsel. As a result of that, many political entities across the country found out that it was fiscally responsible to create public defender's offices. Ours is the second oldest county public defender's office in the United States. It was founded in early 1900. LA beat us by a couple of weeks. I haven't been there all those years, but I'm getting close. What I'm telling you, though, is that, and we broke the numbers down, if you average our lawyers' salaries on a 40-hour work week, it comes out to about $50 an hour. If the court has to appoint a private attorney to represent someone because of a conflict of interest with us or whatever, it's $80 an hour. So the truth of the matter is that the Public Defender's Office organization is one that is, by its nature, it's not cheap, it's fiscally responsible, the way to do things. And what I'd like to do is also indicate to you that the state legislature has enacted a law years ago that said that the public defenders should be paid at the same rate as the county attorney's office, with the same amount of responsibility and the same amount of experience. And we've always attempted in my years here to try to live up to that as best we can. We're never going to catch up totally, and I get it. But with the cooperation of this board, we've gotten fairly close. Sometimes people misunderstand that. They'll say, well, you know, your budget should be substantially lower than the county attorney's office because they have a civil division. Totally true. However, we're not apples to apples. The public defender's office, if we lose a trial and have to appeal the case to the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, our lawyers do the briefs and handle the case. When the state is represented in an appeal for a felony, the Attorney General's office handles that. So that's a part of the equation that we do that the County Attorney's office doesn't do. We also represent, at your request, individuals who were charged with being in contempt of court for failure to pay child support. The county has a contract with a private entity to handle those cases. We handle them on behalf of the county. County Attorney's office does not. Probably the biggest factor, though, is the misdemeanors. We handle between 9,000 and 10,000 misdemeanors every year, and the vast majority of those cases are prosecuted by the city prosecutor's office, not by the county attorney's office. So while they have additional responsibilities that don't involve us, we similarly have additional responsibilities that don't equate necessarily to what the county attorney's office does. I'd like to make mention of some of the things that we do to try to save money. As I said, we're not extravagant. Under the Bar Association rules now, there's mandatory continuing legal education. And that means you have to go to an approved seminar that will allow you to get the required hours as an attorney to maintain your bar license. And as you could well imagine, most of these seminars take place in Las Vegas or Miami or New York City or wherever, because they're attractions to the private bar. Well, they're not very cost effective for a public defender's office. As a result, we have continuously over the last several years created our own in-house continuing legal education that is cost nothing. We do it ourselves. We get it approved by the bar. And while that doesn't cover the entire requirement, because they'll only allow X percentage to be in-house, we do the maximum number that we can do. Any of the others, if you look at our travel vouchers, you'll find that no one's been going on the county dime to any of those places. We do it. We have been able to do some of it online recently, of course. But I will continue to do everything I can to minimize those kind of costs. Additionally, we had a shakeup in the supervisory role of our juvenile court, and as a result, we kind of did a deep dive on what we're doing in juvenile court. And one of the lesser known responsibilities in juvenile court is we represent parents who are at risk of losing their parental rights. Frequently, they're accused both in a criminal case of child abuse, for instance, and also are brought to juvenile court by the county attorney's office in an attempt to either terminate or limit their parental rights. And we represent those folks. And when we kind of did a review of our policies, we found that we were probably, in my opinion, conflicting out of too many cases. When I say conflicting out of it, maybe we represented a child in juvenile court a couple of years ago, and that child was now one of the alleged victims of an abuse or was going to be the subject of a termination. And I decided that that probably wasn't, I thought we were being too concerned about conflicts. And as a result, the number of cases that we've had in juvenile court on what we call parent cases has skyrocketed. That is a savings to the county, because previously If we conflicted out, then the court had to appoint a private attorney at this $80 an hour ticket. And those are no small, they're almost always highly contested and result in trials. So there's a lot of hours that go into those things. We have, in an attempt to limit the necessity of hiring translators, that would include coming into our office with a non-English speaking client, primarily Spanish speaking. We have 10 employees, including a number of attorneys who are fluent in Spanish. That saves us a bunch of money on translators who would, have to come to the office. When we interview the client in the office, would have to go over to the jail with us when we could go to the jail, and also appear with us in court hearings. So those are a number of things that I think over the years we have done in an attempt to keep the budget as low as it would be, as it could be. Oftentimes we hear crime statistics coming from the Omaha Police Department. And oftentimes they say that crime is down. And you might say to yourself, well, geez, if crime's down, why do we have such great need for public defenders if crime is down? Well, when you do a deep dive on that, what you find out is they're only counting crimes against the person and crimes against property. They're not counting drug offenses or possession of firearms cases, which are a huge percentage. And if you look at our daily intake, you'd find a significant number of these are drug cases and possession of firearms, unlawful possession of firearms. Additionally, trials ain't what they used to be. When you have a case these days, compared to several years ago, in those days you would look at the police reports and there'd be, on a misdemeanor or a lower grade felony, maybe 10, 12, 15 pages of police reports. And you'd go and talk to your client and say, well, here's what the cops say, and here's what the cops said the witness said, and go from there. Ball game's totally changed. Even on simple cases like DUIs. Most of them are wearing body cameras now. So instead of reading a police report that takes, half an hour, you're watching body cameras from 2, 3, 4, 5 police officers at a scene to determine whether or not what they put in the report is actually the same as what happened as evidence from the body camera. And you don't have to think too far to just know how important these body cameras or video evidence is, given all the number of cases we've seen, not only locally, but nationally, and how those things can change the game. Additionally, mental health. It's the elephant in the room, and no one seems to be able to have a handle on how to deal with this. The jail, I'm sure Mike could tell you, the jail is populated by a significant percentage of people who have mental health issues. And I'm not just talking about traumatic brain injuries or PTSD. I'm talking about bipolar, schizophrenic, people who are actively, seriously mentally ill. We as a society don't seem to know what to do with them, so what's the remedy of last resort? Throw them in jail. The increase in number of clients that we have that have mental illness is staggering. You can't bring someone to court to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty if they are incompetent to proceed to trial. You can't have a person who's out of it, so to speak, go in front of a judge and make a knowing, intelligent, and voluntary waiver of their rights. So what do we have to do? We have to have them examined. That's not free. We have to have them examined by mental health professionals, and that costs money. And the mental health professionals' fees don't go down, they go up. When you add that with the number of clients that we seem to have mental health evaluations, it gets to be a scarier number. Now, historically, I've been able to juggle the budget by doing things like if someone quits and, you know, maybe I can wait X amount of weeks or months to hire a replacement so I have enough money to hire expert witnesses that are mental health experts. And I haven't even touched on the expert witnesses that I will in a second. We can't have the regional center, for the most part, do these things because there's no physician-patient privilege when they do it. Consequently, we have to hire someone ourselves to do the evaluation, and the doctor-patient privilege applies. And then, obviously, if we go to court and are alleging an insanity defense or something, of course, that report gets handed over to the state. But on many occasions, what we're doing, we're saying, is this person capable of having a discussion with us? Because to be competent to stand trial, you have to be able to assist with your defense. And if you are mentally incapable of doing so, you have to get evaluated, and in the event that the person is deemed to be incompetent, then they're sent to the Lincoln Regional Center, right, Diane? And restored to competence, theoretically. So those costs are going up. The trials that I've got coming up in the next several months are murder cases. They're 2, 3, 4-week trials. And I'm not the only one that does murder. I used to be, I could do all the murder cases because there weren't that many. Not anymore. As you know, expert testimony in criminal cases is on the rise. The state will hire someone to do gunshot residue testing on clothing or a suspect's hands. And if in fact it becomes incriminating, it's incumbent upon us to hire an expert to determine whether or not the state's expert is making valid conclusions or not. That's not free. The big one, though, is DNA. And I think Don spoke to you about those costs in his office. Well, they're pretty expensive for us. They use the DNA lab primarily from UNMC. And they have a new technique. I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but it's called probabilistic genotyping. And they have a computer program that claims that even on the smallest amount of DNA, which is usually now touch DNA, that they can develop a profile. And if it, in part, is similar to that of the defendant, it is going to be used at trial, and its jurors eat that stuff up. And we have two options. We can try to cross-examine someone that's 50,000 times smarter than us in science, because we went to law school because we sucked at math and science. Mike, Jim, and we could try to cross-examine them, and that's no contest. That's, you know, me fighting Muhammad Ali. So the other alternative is to hire experts. Well, there aren't any experts in DNA around here. So we use people in Ohio who I've used over the years. And I've got a case now where the state's using a person who developed one of these probabilistic genotyping programs who's from New Zealand. And you can imagine the cost on when they were flying him here. And I've got this trial coming up where the only evidence from a 2001 case is allegedly some DNA that they're attributing to my client on a casing found on the deceased's body. So we hired an expert, and he's from Scotland. And luckily, we've been able to do a lot of things via Zoom, but you can't do a trial via Zoom. You got to get these folks here, and they can't just look at a case and in 20 minutes say, here's what you need to do. So these things are real costs, and that makes me nervous. You know, obviously, anytime that we try to put a budget together, it's a projection. It's what do we think is going to happen in the next year? What can we control? What can't we control? What I've done is I've got, you know, like as Commissioner Borison mentioned, it's approximately 190,000 over the targeted number. And what I'm asking you to do is allow me to have a little flexibility. I would love to hire another lawyer because, as you know, the cases are opening up. Whether or not I can do that under the current situation, I'm not sure. I would also love to hire, we have a juvenile services coordinator and we have a adult social services coordinator. And they do a lot of the things for our clients that you just heard about from some of the earlier presentations about trying to connect them with treatment facilities, employment, and in many instances to try to get them out of jail to attend these things. She's overwhelmed. We have 56 lawyers, and for adults we have one person, and for juvenile services we have one person. And then the additional money is the 1.5% increase. Now, I screwed up when I sent you the original letter of our budget request, because typically I'm skittish about implementing pay increases until I see the money in, what's the name of that? The program, Oracle program. So a lot of times I'll give a small amount in January, and then when the money shows up in Oracle, then I give the pay increases that were approved. I got burned one year when I screwed up because there were 27 pay periods, right, Joe? And I had to come here and say, oops, I didn't realize there were 27 pay periods. Luckily, he told me that won't happen for another 10 years or so, so that's not the case. But that's why, because when we originally put the number in, and I said, geez, we're coming in right at the number. And it was because it didn't include our mistake, our non-budget, I'm sorry, our non-salary portion of the budget. It's no secret that the significant amount of money in our budget is always going to be personnel. That's just the nature of the beast. You know, I don't need new cruisers. I don't have to put in new showers. I have to try to keep the best group of lawyers I can together to serve the clientele that we are constitutionally obliged to handle. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like I said, I'm hedging a little bit and asking for this money because I may need it for some of these expert witnesses. I don't know what this guy is going to end up costing me in Scotland. I don't know what, these doctors are going to cost us. We are a reactive entity. We don't get to pick and choose what cases we get and what clients we get. And, the nature of the beast is that none of these costs are going down. And we've done our best, and we'll continue to do our best to live within a reasonable budgetary amount. So unless you have questions, I'll sit down, shut up.
No, thank you, Tom. That was very good presentation. Commissioner Boyle?
Yes, I'm so impressed with the operations of Tom's office. I took some people through unannounced, and Tom was there, and we went through about a year and a half ago or so, and showed the office where there's 4 clerks sitting there working in an office that's intended for 1. We are going to be across the street soon, I hope. In any event, we've got a elected official. How often do you hear elected officials say, I screwed up a couple of times? He hasn't screwed up at all. It just simply hasn't. He's a candid public official. He's very talented, and we need to adequately fund his office. And I fully support this, and to give him what discretion he needs to make the office function. And the bottom line is that he's the guy that when you hear on TV shows, you have a right to remain silent, blah, 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 and the right will supply an attorney if you can't afford one. This is the guy that does that. And he does it with such great talent. He's developing a talented defense lawyers group too, which is really a good thing for our community. So I fully support what Mr. Riley's asking for. And I also asked the fiscal manager a couple of days ago and some other people to make sure that he is being paid on a par with the county attorney. That's a state law, and that is happening. So, Tom, you're running a hell of a good office, and you actually make me proud to be a lawyer, to tell you the truth. You're really a great advocate. I've heard you speak many times in meetings, and you always speak up for the people that you have to defend, which is what it's all about. So I'm all for you, and those are my comments.
Well, thanks. Thanks. And, I would be remiss if I didn't echo what Commissioner Boyle just said. We have, I oftentimes used to say, God, I'm worried we don't have that strong of a bench. Man, do we have a strong bench. We have some lawyers that we've developed. Some of them were law clerks and have stayed with us. And we've had some folks come in from other areas. Their significant other moved here, and they had experience in public defender's offices, and we've been very lucky. I am so proud of the work that our lawyers and our support staff do. Just suffice to say, I'm really proud of them.
Thank you, Tom. Any other questions or comments? I do have one, Tom, and then I know it's a sore subject with me and it's a sore subject with you, but you're coming at us asking for additional money, and it gives me heartburn to know the amount of money that we have to supply the state for their public advocacy office. And I'm not saying it's not worthy. It's I understand the rest of the counties may not have what we have.
Right.
But this is a perfect example of where it's costing us more by having to fund that office. And I think the last time we tried to get some and all of that money back, it was in the $400,000 range. The argument has always been, well, Douglas County, you can use them too, but if you really look, it costs more to use that office than it does how we do it. So I would like to keep working on trying to get, again, all or a part of that. Again, we shouldn't have to suffer funding our office here in Douglas County because we're funding the rest of the counties. And so I would just say we need to keep working on that. But other than that, I appreciate your presentation and thoroughness of explanation.
Well, thank you. And just on that note, there was some movement in this legislative session to try to get the funding for that entity come from state coffers, not from filing fees.
Right.
That may, at some point, it didn't go through, but it may. So.
I doubt it this year, but we'll keep watching.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Boyle.
Well, I just want to comment that when we had a bill introduced a couple of years ago to do exactly what Mr. Riley was talking about, and I went down and talked to the director in Lancaster County, and most of that money, it's intended for counties around the state for representation of people who can't afford a lawyer. But it's my understanding that most of that money, if not all of it, goes to Lancaster County, which is frankly a scandal. So anyway, I talked to the director and I had a serious conversation, and obviously I got nothing from it. So I really support exactly what you're talking about, Commissioner, and also Mr. Riley.
Honestly, when this year's legislative session came in, I actually talked to the director as well, and he told me about the discussion he had with you, and he had actually made some movement to get away from being the conflict counsel for the Lancaster County Public Defender's Office. You know, by the way, just for you, so you know, Lancaster County had one murder case that the Public Defender's Office handled last year. We had about 30. So, you know, again, it's apples to oranges, but do with that as you will.
Right. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, thanks.
All right, with that, any other questions or comments? Larry?
Thank you, sir. There's one citizen and lawyer that I can listen to. Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, 68132. Unlike a lot of other people, I have time to sit down here and maybe waste my time listening. Most people are working. Other people just aren't interested. But what I hear over the years and what I just heard there points out something. You are supposed to represent us, but I don't think they meant just making the decisions for us. I think the citizens are supposed to be able to influence your decisions. But I can only vote for or against Maureen Boyle. I can't vote any of you people in or out. All I can do is come down here and point out where you're maybe wrong and what you should maybe rethink. As I look at what's going on at the state today and on the legislative agenda later here, there's a lot of badness. You heard some of the badness right there. You've heard some of the madness in the city council and some here about ride-along mental health experts, ride-along social workers, or maybe having them listening in on the 911 calls. And they would decide whether to send a social worker or a mental health expert or a police officer or a fire department or whatever. Human nature being what it is, do you not think that's going to create a hell of a backload of things and things that will not get responded to in time? And then you'll have to spend more money?
This idea of your escape, not on a Zoom, you know what I mean, but in actual.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't tell whether you're commenting to me or. Take the mask off, for Pete's sake. It's going to increase his budget because you heard him when he started off. Under the Constitution, you could not detain people without justification. Mentally ill, but you have to assess them first. So I'm standing out in my yard mowing the grass and looking at my flag that's upside down. Police officer drives by and says, "Oh, under the guidelines I've been trained on, that person probably has a mental problem. He's not supposed to be doing that. So send out a mental health expert." They come out, talk to me, and I get upset. And they call back and tell the 911 person, it's not a mental problem, it's a behavior problem. Send out a social worker. Social worker gets out there and determines you can't fix that guy because it's just human nature. So don't spend the money. Don't spend the money on these things that are completely oblivious to common sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move to the community services agenda, and the first is a reallocation of the 2021 Visitors Improvement Fund Grant Award for the Omaha Equestrian Foundation. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Commissioner Rogers, seconded by Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Boyle, did you want to say anything? Your light was,
Yep,
your hand
there
was
we go.
up.
Yeah, just going to mention that for the Omaha Equestrian Foundation, they had $36,500 that they just wanted to go more towards technology improvements. It's money that they didn't use last year, so they want to reallocate it for that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thank you. And maybe Ms. Hall could help us with this a little bit.
Morning, Catherine Hall, Assistant County Administrator.
Thank you. So this 36,580 was awarded from the last grant cycle of the Visitors Improvement Fund. Is that
Correct.
right?
The board approved this original award last summer.
Okay. And there's a cycle we're in the middle of it right now. They just submitted for going forward, right?
Correct.
Okay. When I read this resolution, it says the Omaha Equestrian Foundation did not hold the 2021 International Horse Competition. When was that supposed to be?
That would have been this spring. I think it was originally scheduled for March or April.
Of this year?
Correct.
Okay. So they do the grant cycle for the following year. This would have been an award from 2020 for a 2021 event.
Correct.
Right?
So typically the timeline would be the county board receives applications near the end of April. The Visitor Promotion Council reviews those applications May, June, makes recommendations to this board, and then the grant award period is from July of one year. It follows the fiscal year, so July of one year through June of the following year. So their application last year was submitted in April. The board approved it in July, and it was for an event that was taking place this spring of 2021.
Okay. And they have submitted for this current grant cycle as well, correct?
Correct. They've submitted a new application this year for an event that would take place in the next award cycle, which is spring of 2022.
Okay. So they're not asking us to just pay this forward. They're going to use it for something else and then come in for another grant for next year. Is that right?
Correct, yes, and that's how it typically works, and particularly last year, I got guidance from the board that essentially each award year stands on its own. So every year there might be, by the time an applicant submits an application in spring, there might be some changes as the year goes on, and this year, of course, in particular with the pandemic, a lot of groups had to make adaptations. So that was the case here, is they're asking to reallocate funding in their current award for something they can still do in this current award period.
Right. And I think we see another one from Film Streams for kind of the same thing, right?
Correct, yes. They were unable to use, part of the guidance is that events must be for live, in-person events. And that's a discussion I've had, with our county attorney's office to what kind of eligible activities might be. And of course, lots of applicants have adapted their activities to something virtual, which is great and protects the public health and safety, but doesn't align with the eligibility of the funds. So that was the case with Film Streams, which is the next item, is they were able to adapt their awarded programming to something virtual, but because that didn't align with the funding, they've proposed to reallocate it for something else that they could do during this period that would be eligible.
And our grant awards, are these the only two who had to cancel events that they were awarded grants for?
No, I believe it was last month, another recipient requested a reallocation that was presented to the board. And there have been a handful of, the board made awards last year, and there were a couple applicants who ended up not accepting the award because they just determined they couldn't move forward, nor were there any opportunities for them to reallocate. It really kind of depends on the award and activities. And there were a couple who have done sort of scaled back versions of what they applied for, so they have or will return some of their funds.
And we may have to come back to finish this up, but what I'm saying is, all of the people who are similarly situated, have they been addressed in one way or another? Either they've gone before us for a continuation of the award to pay for something else, or they lapsed the award back to the fund?
Yes. So we did an interim report for all recipients, and I would say the majority of recipients have been able to fulfill their award in the way they proposed and the way the board approved. There's a handful who are requesting reallocations, a handful who just declined the award, and then a couple others who said, we can do a scaled back version of that original intent, and then we'll return the excess funds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mike Boyle? I think you're muted, Mike.
To kind of fill in the gaps for Commissioner Kavanaugh, these are very common requests, and frankly, these people could have spent the money without even telling us, and we could have diverted it. They shouldn't be penalized for their honesty and their candor. They have other needs. When they make these applications, they don't fully fund their needs, and so this is money that they were able to, for whatever reason, was not spent, and so they're asking us to redirect it to another need, which I think is a good thing and a good practice. And it is not widespread. It's just done on a case-by-case basis. And the same will come up for film streams, where there's been some change, and of course, all those operations were stymied when the COVID hit. So I think these are just natural reallocations, and much to their credit, they didn't try to bury the expenditure. They were honest and are coming forward and saying, use a little help here, and here's some money we have left over. So I support these applications without any really comment at all. They're just good practice, and it's an honest presentation by these organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, can you turn your light on again, please? Thank you. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
I agree with Commissioner Boyle. This is, just kind of dealing with another unintended consequence of the pandemic. And so it would be helpful, maybe, Ms. Hall, if we could get a kind of a brief analysis of all of these so that they're apparent to us that some people did lapse the money back, some people expended it on other things, just from an information point of view. Those that did not expend it, but kind of lapsed it, does that amount go to the fund amount available this year going forward for this grant cycle?
Yes. Yes, it will.
Okay. And if we could have an idea of what that is, because I understand that the revenues are significantly down year over year because of the pandemic to the cycle, so that'll actually offer a little bit of flexibility there. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Please vote.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, all other commissioners voting in person.
Next is item 2, a reallocation of the 2021 Visitors Improvement Fund Grant Award for film streams. Commissioner Maureen Boyle.
Yep, similarly, this is just to help fund a new seating and sound system with film streams, and they're just reallocating funds once again, so present that.
Is there a motion to approve? Is there a second? Motion by Commissioner Rogers, seconded by Commissioner Friend. Any questions or comments? Larry, are you wanting to speak on this item?
Larry Storer, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, 68132. I hate to be in a negative mood all day, but I want to pose some questions about visitor improvement funds. Some I believe are necessary, some I don't think are. Some I think might be discriminatory. Let's talk about film theaters. And I read the attachments to the agenda. I've been to film streams a number of times. I've been to quite a few theaters a number of times. I don't see other theaters here looking for money to help rebuild seats and legroom and various things. But some of them also provide a public venue for discussion or whatever of citizens, but they're not lining up at the trough. So here again, $29,000 or whatever, maybe that's not necessary. That might well go to the person that rides along with a police officer or mental health expert or whoever that is, instead of increasing the budgets, cut the budgets a little bit. Foundations, some people feel that some foundations, not all, are a pass-through, meaning that people that operate the foundation pocket money as a salary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe true, maybe not. It's probably true in some cases, not necessarily this one. But I know the Buffett Foundation is behind it also. All these other things listed on your display attached to the agenda, all foundations. Why can't film streams make it with their money and their own money and from ticket sales? I don't really think that people are driving to Omaha just to go to film streams. And by the way, some of the films I've seen there are pretty political. We're not supposed to support that, are we? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Mike Boyle?
Yes, I have to comment about somebody pocketing money. That's really an insult. This is a very well-run organization. We're very fortunate in Omaha to have some excellent nonprofits who are doing really great work. This is one of them. This theater offers films that are not really seen in other theaters or venues around the city. It's well known to create controversy sometimes, and they do have discussions afterwards. When Ann and I would go, we would really enjoy the discussions afterward about an issue that, whether it was about women being kidnapped and used for terrible things, all sorts of discussions that are useful and open your mind to things. So the this visitor improvement fund is a tax that's collected by people who stay in Omaha at the hotels, and it's redistributed to organizations that provide a wider view of Omaha, that expands our minds and our intelligence and our experiences, whether it's the Omaha Equestrian Foundation or whether it's the Film Streams or the host of others that are involved. These are really great organizations. We're so fortunate to have them. And they do raise a lot of money themselves. I've been a member for many years. I pay my annual dues, which aren't much, and I get a discount when I go to the theater, including the popcorn, by the way. So at any event, these are great organizations that deserve our support. And no one's pocketing any money. That's just not happening. They're being paid reasonable salaries, and all the books are open. So I hope we all vote for this unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And was there a motion and a second? Okay. Please, any other questions or comments? Please vote.
I vote yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, all other commissioners voting in person.
Next is our Human Resources, the weekly personnel report from Civil Service. In your packet is the next item, the legislative issues, and just to go over a few things, May 7th marked the 74th legislative day of the 90th session. They are having some pretty late nights, but of the 104 priority bills, 26 have passed, 22 are on final reading, 32 are on select file, 9 are on general, 6 failed to advance on the floor, and 9 are held in committee. As for this week, Senate Speaker Hilgers, his message was that they're completing their second long week. And as a reminder, as announced, he announced it previously that they're adjourning early before the short weekend to give members more time away. Next week, though, meaning this week, they're going to do it's going to be a long week. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday were announced earlier as dates we could work into the evening, which they have. He also asked the senators to plan on working late those nights. And again, that is happening. He also said that there will be various bills Again, that will be taken up and taken long debate. On Wednesday will be the debate of 474, Senator Wichart's bill on Medicinal Cannabis Act, which would, I take it, be a long evening as well. But I did want to point out a couple of ones, and if you remember, Marcos and Sean Kelly did a great job of putting together kind of the anticipated loss or new cost for us, and we've been tracking those. But again, just to name a few reminders of LB 83, which is the Open Meetings Act, that to provide the virtual conferencing that was passed and signed by the governor on April 21st. Our bill, LB 215, which was our change in the 911 surcharge provision, actually carried by Senator Hughes as his priority, that failed to advance on the floor, and I was very disappointed because it really was our contingency of senators that killed it. LB 313, changing provisions relating to late applications for homestead exemption, that's on select file. We're supportive of that. And then LB 451 includes the characteristics associated with race, culture, and personhood with definition of race, including hair texture and protective hairstyles. That passed and approved by the governor on 5/5. And then yesterday was LB 568, and it changed provisions relating to truancy, juvenile courts, and the community-based juvenile service aid program, and that did advance. The ones that we had to watch, but it did pass, was LB 17, which changed fees and provided for transfers to the Nebraska Retirement Fund for judges. That was passed and approved by the governor as well on 5/5, and there is an estimated cost mandate to the county, estimated at additionally about $90,000. LB 73, which was a direct portion of the proceeds for the Racetrack Gaming Act, will go to the county agricultural societies. That is a reduction in funds going to counties and cities from the revenue generated by racetrack gaming. That's on general file. And I do have a question that I don't need to go into today, but would like questions because we don't have an active, per se, agricultural society. How does that affect us? I know there's been work done on that when we were looking at doing the fair and should we reinvent or reinstitute the Ag Society? What does that mean? And now how does this affect us? So again, I'll not take time today, but would ask that we take a look at that. And then LB 292, change provisions relating to partial payments on property taxes. This is on general file, but again, it is a new cost mandate to counties, estimated at about $300,000 plus annually. LB 310 changes the inheritance tax rate and exemption amounts. And again, this is a loss of revenue to the county. As amended by AM 635, there's a 15% reduction on inheritance tax revenue. This is estimated at a loss of about $2 million to Douglas County, potentially. LB 352, which is changing the amounts of certain court fees, that's on general file. And that is, again, an increase estimated at additionally about a $75,000 annual cost to the county. And then LB 407 there's certain county correctional officers, this is just for Douglas and Lancaster, in provisions governing mental injuries and mental illness under the Nebraska Workers' Compensation Act. This is estimated, again, in costing us possibly hundreds and thousands annually, so we need to really watch that one. And the last one is LB 644, that the Amendment 1019 takes over 644, but again, this is adopting the Property Tax Request Act, changing the dates relating to tax levies, and change provisions relating to property tax refunds. This adds a 2% allowance limit on tax request. To exceed percentage, we have to mail out a postcard and hold a joint public meeting between September 17th and the 29th. That's on final reading. And the new cost is again estimated to be potentially in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and will again, I think it'll also be semantics that are going to be real problematic with that bill. So again, I wanted to keep everybody updated. Marcos is going to be updating our little chart so we know and have which ones have passed that will affect us financially. And we will follow those and keep following them and keep updating them. And when Marcos gets back, we'll update that spreadsheet. But I just wanted everybody to be aware of those. We're starting to see the impacts. Commissioner Morgan? Oh, sorry. There you go.
Thank you, Mary Ann, for that update. And Mike, friend, I'd ask you to correct anything I might say. Mike and I have been meeting with Joe on a pretty regular basis. We have a meeting tomorrow morning, talking to a department about their budget, and we'll see what comes of that. But I think we are facing some difficult decisions because just as the public defender appeared here today, we'd like to be supportive of that, certainly, and know the work that he does and the good work that he does. And you see his vehicle here on Saturdays and working, and have seen that for some years. But at the same time, my goal, and I'm speaking just for myself, is at this time not to have a mill levy increase. But some of these items that the legislature may pass or looks like they're going to pass could have a tremendous impact on us. And I'll also say this to the commissioners, you know, there's a good chance when you see the amount of vacancies in office buildings, commercial property, the hotel situation, that certainly some of those people are going to be here to request a reduction in the value of their property, which would be, in some cases, very, very justified. And we are seeing home values increase 20 or 30% because of some sales. And we also have to consider that one of the reasons for some of these price increases is supply and demand. Normally, you may have over 2,000 listings. I know it was around 400 a month ago, and then I've just heard in the last week someone tell me there's less than 400 homes on the market for sale. And of course, I don't like comparing homes to toilet paper, but when you see the demand and the supply, it does increase the value. And that's something, you know, we need to be aware of as we're voting for these items. And I, for one, again, will repeat it. At this time, I don't want to see us have to have a mill levy increase here at our county board. And I'll try to do everything I can to see that we don't have that. So I appreciate all of you listening to that. And if there's any questions of me, great. And as I said, Mike, friend, Commissioner, I welcome your constructive suggestions or criticism of anything I just said.
I think, again, that's the purpose of continually bringing up these legislative items that are going to cost us potential dollars, no matter what the amount is. Again, as we prepare, there's many things that Commissioner Morgan brought up that are going to affect our budget. And that's why it's very important that we stay on top of these and continue to monitor and report out what the state, again, is mandating on us, and it is an unfunded mandate. Commissioner Mike Boyle? I think you're on mute, Mike.
Try to behave, you know what I mean? Joe Lorenz has prepared an excellent graph and some other materials, which I'll pass on to all the commissioners, which shows the cost of the justice system in Douglas County. What I would hope to do someday is to convince the legislature that these property tax reliefs, where they approve $313 million and then send, $18 checks to taxpayers, is just not an effective way to do things. What they need to do is to accept the responsibility for some of the cost of operations that are definitely state operations inside our counties across the state. That would be a terrific property tax relief if they could do that and actually pay the bill for some of the juvenile service. I also think that we ought to be writing, prepare something with the chair's signature to the state senators and the governor as well, trying to lay out the expenses that are being passed on to the state while we're being accused in some really rough discussions of being dishonest and hiding the ball and all the rest of it. It was really pretty disheartening to hear those things from Lincoln, that we actually are trying to deliver the services at the most reasonable cost that we can, while the figure is constantly moving on us and it's growing. So it's difficult to do that, and I certainly intend to do what Commissioner Morgan suggested. I think the complaint is that we take advantage of a windfall when the valuations go up, if they do, that we continue our mill levy when really we're getting more money. But what are we supposed to do when we have so many units of unions that we have to negotiate with? I'm very much for unions, but the demands are there, and if we don't work on it, we're going to find ourselves before the CIR. And years ago, that was the method. They just ignored it and went to CIR and got mandated to give raises. And we are not doing that. We have a very skilled labor group that works very effectively, and we haven't had to go to the CIR for some time. In any event, I support, and I'm really pleased to hear the report that you just gave, Commissioner Borgeson. And I'm looking forward to taking other action, whatever we can do. But I think we ought to tell the senators the whole story of the justice system, and also the additional costs that you just talked about that we have to pay as a result of their action, unfunded mandates. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. And that was sent to all senators at the beginning, but we, again, will continue to update that so we're all updated on which ones have passed for sure. Though at the time, it was all potential, so.
Thanks.
Anything else on legislative items that we reported? Larry? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Friend first. I shut his button off too early.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all right. She was teaching me a valuable lesson. I was more than willing not to say a word. Commissioner Morgan is right. I will say that this is potentially good news. The legislature does. I know Marianne watches it very closely, and I used to, of course, and not as much anymore because I don't have the stomach for it. But what I would say is that you can sit down and read, you can take 4 nights, 2 nights, however fast a reader you are, and read Wealth of Nations, or you could turn around and read the Communist Manifesto. You could read Karl Marx the next night. Ultimately, I used to tell my kids, you got to be creative about the way you make money. Our economy's changing, and it's changing rapidly. What I found interesting is one of the bills that went through yesterday, through General File, Mike Flood's cryptocurrency Telcoin bill. This is very interesting times. And you want to talk about an economy that's changing and the opportunities that we may have that don't look like 20th century economics. Take a look at it. Go look at this stuff because it's very interesting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Larry?
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I just want to repeat something real quick about, I believe it was Karl Marx that said, from each according to what they have, to each according to what they need. Socialism never works. Founding Fathers also said, when your government doesn't, and won't, you alter or throw off that government. Now, they don't mean today by physical violence with guns, but they mean with Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, which you're sworn to, but our state government is also. If you haven't read your state government's constitution, you should, because it needs to be rewritten. But they also have in there a similar thing about convention of people in the state of Nebraska, but they're probably meaning the state legislatures. However, when you can't trust your state legislature, what do? I suggest people do what the Founding Fathers suggested, and that is a convention of states, meaning a convention of the people, not a convention of the state legislators or the city council or the commissioners, but of the people. Maybe your neighbor, with your neighbor, and then the neighborhood association, and then the city, and then the county, your own small conventions. Then you go to the state, meet with people of the state, not the legislators, and change your state legislature from a one horse to a two house. I'm part of the second house, but you don't like to hear me, do you? So we need to change that, don't we? People can do that. We can throw off the state legislature if you don't like them. Unfortunately, once again, I can only legally vote for or against one person. And I can't browbeat you to vote for or against the other person. But if I can convince you to rouse the other people through a convention, we might have a chance at changing it. They could propose their own amendments. We have to vote it in or out, yes. But we have no control on that. But we need to have. Because a lot of these bills, real quickly, and then I'll end up, there's 5 of them I want to mention. Just in terms. Election Commission is question mark. Speaking at open meetings, question mark. Requiring jails and law enforcement people to give public notice before you agree with ICE or anybody to detain an illegal or a gang member or whatever. Having appointed instead of elected assessors, election commission bills, city council bill, racial impact statements. Boy, oh boy, we're pitting everybody against everybody, aren't we? Isn't it time to change it? Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on legislation? We do have need for an executive session for litigation purposes. Is there a motion to go to executive session for that purpose? Motion by Commissioner Maureen Boyle, seconded by Commissioner Morgan. Please vote. Commissioner Mike Boyle.
I just have a call for a personal privilege, if I could. The South High just moved to the semifinals of the soccer game, which is played at Morrison Field. And it's significant for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that it's a team of immigrants. These are young people from Kenya and from Sudan who practice long hours, and they just had success. And I think it's important to point out again that these are immigrants. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. With that,
Sorry.
We can go in probably 15 minutes. Does that give people enough time to grab something? Okay, in room 903. Will that give you enough time, Karen? Okay. Please vote.
I vote yes for all of you to go into executive session.
Thanks.
Motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Mike Boyle voting virtually, other commissioners voting in person.